everyone and welcome to this ReactJS tutorial for beginners. If you want to build dynamic web applications or launch a career in front-end development, you're in the right place. ReactJS is one of the most in-demand JavaScript libraries used by top companies like Facebook, Netflix and Airbnb. So in this session, we will help you understand the core concepts of React and guide you step by step from the basics to building real-world projects and even preparing for the interviews. So here's what we will cover in this video. First, we will start with ReactJS fundamentals, where you will learn what React is, how it works, and why it's so popular in front-end development. Next, conditional rendering in ReactJS, where we will learn how to display components based on certain conditions, which is a key skill in dynamic UI development. Next, moving on to ReactJS hooks. We will explore hooks like useState and useEffect, which simplify working with state and lifecycle methods. Next, React Router, where we will understand how to add page navigations to your React apps using React Router. Moving on to ReactJS projects, where you will apply what you have learned by building real-world projects to strengthen your skills. Next, we will share a roadmap and tips to help you launch your career as a React developer. And finally, we will prepare you with the commonly asked interview questions to help you land your first job to ace your next interview. But before we begin, please like, share and subscribe, and remember to hit the bell icon to stay updated on the latest tech content from Edureka. Also, Edureka's ReactJS training course is designed to prepare you for professional roles in web development by helping you build rich and interactive user interfaces using React, one of the most popular JavaScript libraries. You will learn the core concepts of React including JSX, props, states, events, reducers, actions, and how to manage state effectively. So this course is perfect for anyone looking to master React and enhance their front-end development skills. So enroll today and start building modern web applications. So check out the course link given in the description box below. Now, let's get started with our first topic, that is ReactJS Explained.
Let's dive into the three major reasons to make React so useful. So the first one is component-based architecture. In React component-based architecture, UI is broken down into reusable, self-contained components. Each component has its own structure and behavior. In this layout, the page is divided into different parts: a navigation bar at top, a sidebar at right, and the main display area. In React, we build each of these sections as individual components, meaning each one can function independently. So the next one is virtual DOM. The virtual DOM is essentially a lightweight copy of actual DOM. Instead of directly making changes to the real DOM every time something updates, React updates this virtual DOM first. Once React has figured out what has changed, it then updates only the necessary parts of the real DOM. And after that, we have the development speed. React component structure allows us to quickly build and test small parts of the app individually. Since each component is separate, we can focus on building and styling one section at a time without breaking other parts of the page. This saves the time and helps us to build application faster. So in short, React component structure, development speed, and virtual DOM help us to create dynamic, efficient, and user-friendly applications. So now let us move on to what is React. First of all, React is an open-source JavaScript library. React is maintained by developers worldwide and is focused on building user interfaces, making it highly adaptable and community-driven. The next one is React makes development fast, scalable, and simple. React component-based architecture allows developers to break UIs into reusable paths, speeding up the development and making the large application easier to manage. Next is React is used for building user interfaces, mainly single-page applications. React is perfect for single-page applications where content updates dynamically without reloading the entire page, offering a smooth user experience. And the last one is React enables data changes without reloading the page. With features like virtual DOM, React efficiently updates the data in real time, allowing the web applications to respond quickly without full-page reloads. Now let us have a look on trending frameworks. So here is the data from Stack Overflow, and here we can see that ReactJS is most trending framework currently. So React is the popular choice for developers nowadays. Now that we have a clear understanding of what React actually is, let us explore why it is a such popular choice among the developers. So the first one is Virtual DOM. React's Virtual DOM updates changes efficiently without refreshing the whole page, making apps fast and responsive. The second one is development speed. With the reusable components and large community of pre-built libraries, React helps developers to build applications quickly. Next one is stability. React uses one-way data flow, which means change in child component won't affect the parent component. This keeps the app stable and easy to manage. The next one is interactive interface. React makes it easy to build highly interactive UIs, which means user can get smoother and more engaging experience. The next one is component-based architecture. React divides the UIs into components, allowing us to build, update and reuse parts independently, saving a lot of time and effort. The next one is server-side rendering. React supports server-side rendering, which can improve page load speed and SEO by rendering the content on the server before sending it to the user. The next one is simple to use. React's simple syntax and clear structure make it beginner-friendly, letting new developers start creating apps quickly. The next one is flexible development. React flexibility allows it to be used in a variety of projects, from small apps to large-scale enterprise applications. So now that we have covered the key components of React, let's move on to setting up your development environment, where we are going to download VS Code and then we will install Node.js for running React on our systems. Now to download Visual Studio Code, we need to visit the official website of Visual Studio Code. We are just going to click on this website and then we are going to just click on the download. If you are using Windows, you just need to click here. In case you are using Mac, you need to click here. So I am using Windows, I need to click here. So now after the download process, you will see something like this. You just need to click on I accept the agreement. Next, just check these boxes, create desktop icon, open with code and open with code. Click on next and finally click on install. So that will install Visual Studio Code into your system. So now after installing VS Code into our system, we are going to install Node.js. And to download Node.js, just visit this website nodejs.org. And you just need to click on this download the LTS version. So now after clicking on the download Node.js LTS version, you'll be able to download the exe file. So after completing the download process, you will see this interface. You just need to click on next, and I already have Node installed in my PC, so I'm getting these options. Otherwise, you will just get a next option. Let us say I want to change it, and then again you will click on next, next, and then you will just get a finish option here. So that will start the installation of Node.js. So after successfully installing the Node.js, what we are going to do is we are going to open our command prompt to cross-check whether Node.js has been successfully installed into our system or not. So for that, we need to write one command. So the first command is node-v. So this right here is telling the version of our Node.js. So the next command is npm-v. So this is also telling the version, npm version that we have installed. So by this, we know that Node.js and npm has been successfully installed into our terminal. So what is the next step? So next step is to open our VS Code, and then in VS Code, we are going to check whether Node and npm are working or not. So here I am on my Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to open my terminal here, and here is my terminal. So inside terminal, I'm going to repeat the commands. So the first one was node-v. That's it. It is showing the version of Node and it is successfully working in my Visual Studio Code. And then it is npm-v. So now npm is also working in my Visual Studio Code. So now we have successfully installed the VS Code and Node.js into our system, and now we are ready to create one project. So now that React is installed, let's move on to creating our first React app. So to create our first React app, we are going to open Visual Studio Code. Inside this, we are going to open one folder. So here I am going to create one new folder, and I'm going to name it as React Dev. We'll just select this folder, and now we have access to this folder. Inside this folder, we are going to open the terminal, and inside the terminal, we are going to create the app. So to create the app, we are going to use this command, that is npx create react app. And after this, you can provide any name which you want to provide to your app. Let's say I'll provide it as React and then enter. And the installation of the dependencies will start. Just write Y here and enter. So now this will create the React app and add the dependencies into my React app. So we need to choose the different project name. I'll just choose npx create React app and let's say counter. That's it. Now it should create my project. And now this is installing the packages into my folder. Right here we can see the counter app has been created and the package.json has been added inside it. Now let us wait till the React app is getting created. Now here we can see that our first React app has been successfully created. The node modules has been added, the source components has been added, and we can see the package.json and everything is added in our folder. So this is how you create your React app. And now what we are going to do is we are going to run our React app. So for that we can just use cd and the app name, that is counter, and enter. And after this we'll just start our React app. That's it. We are going to launch our React app. So here we can see this is our first React app. So by default, when you are going to install the React app, you are going to see these things. So now we are going to make some changes in our React app and then we are going to write the code for hello world. So there are some useless files that you need to delete first. So inside the src, you are just going to keep the index.js and app.js. Rest you can delete. And that's it. I'm going to remove the logo also. Now we are going to make some changes in our app.js. So first of all, we are going to remove these. And then we are going to remove the code inside the return statement. And we are going to write one heading here. That will be hello world. That's it. We are going to save it. And we'll move on to index.js. Inside index.js, first of all, we'll remove all this. And then we are going to remove this and this. So now we are going to just save our file and just look at the output. So this is the output. The code we have written inside the return statement is hello world. So this is our first React app. We have successfully written our first code in React, that is hello world. So now what we are going to do is we are going to learn some core concepts of React and then we will be creating one counter app. So now that our first React app is up and running, let's dive into the core concepts of React that make building applications so powerful and efficient. So the core components of React includes components. Components are the building blocks of React app. Each part of your UI is component, which can be reused to make development faster and cleaner. They help us to break down the complex UIs into manageable pieces. Next on we have JSX. JSX is a syntax that looks like HTML but works inside the JavaScript. It makes it easier to write the structure of your React component. JSX allows you to combine HTML-like code with JavaScript functionality in one place. Next on we have is Virtual DOM. The Virtual DOM is lightweight copy of the actual DOM. React uses it to update the UI efficiently by only changing what's necessary, making the app faster. This reduces unnecessary operations and improves the performance. Next on we have is state management. State refers to the data that changes in your app. React lets you to manage state inside the components. So when the state changes, your UI automatically updates. This is essential for handling dynamic data like form inputs or user interactions. Next on we have props. Props is basically short for properties. These are used to pass data from one component to another. helping you make your component dynamic and reusable. They allow you to customize component based on the data that they receive. Next on we have is event handlers. Event handlers in React are functions that handles user interactions like click, form submissions, and more, allowing your app to respond to user actions. They provide a way to trigger changes in your app based on the user input. So now that we have covered the core concepts of React, let's switch to VS Code and apply these concepts in real project. We will see how everything works together with hands-on coding. So the first thing again I'm going to do is I'm going to open one folder inside my Visual Studio Code. So I'll just create one more folder naming counter. I'll just select this folder and again we are going to create this app. So inside our terminal, again we are going to write npx create React app counter. That's it. So our app has been created. Now what we are going to do is we are going to move into the app by cd counter. That's it. Now again we are going to delete the unnecessary things. That includes index.css, logo, and these two files. We are also going to delete this app.css. So now we are going to create one more file inside it, which will be counter.js. That's it. We are going to work on these three files. And again, one more file we should create for our styling. So it should be style.css. And that's it. So first of all, we will start with counter.js. So by creating this counter.js, we are going to understand the concepts of state, props, and event handling. So what we are going to create is we are going to create an app in which we will increment or decrement the numbers. And by creating that, we will be understanding the concepts of state management and properties and event handling. So first of all, we are going to import the React to use the JSX syntax and define the React component. So it will be import React from React. Now here we are defining the properties that we are going to use, which includes count, increment, and decrement, and along with that one reset. So these are the properties that we are passing. So basically counter is a functional component that takes the four props, which includes count, increment, decrement, and reset. These props are passed down from the app component, enabling counter to display and manipulate the count value based on the user interaction. Now the counter component returns JSX that renders div element with class counter. Inside this div section, the current count value is displayed inside h1 element as a counter count. And then we have created these three buttons, including increment, decrement, and reset. The increment button triggers the increment function from the properties to increase the count when clicked. And after that we have this decrement button. So this triggers the decrement function from the properties to decrease the count when clicked. And then on we have this reset button. This reset button triggers the reset function from the properties to reset the count to 0 when clicked. Now here we can see that each of the button uses onClick attribute to call the function when clicked. Since increment, decrement, and reset functions are passed as props from the app component, clicking these buttons triggers the respective functions in the app that we are going to write. So for example, the increment button is clicked, the increment is called, which increases the count in the app component state. This triggers a re-render of counter updating the displayed count. So that's it for the counter.js. And now we are going to create the app.js. Now here we are on the app.js section. So let us have a look on the app.js. So for imports, we are importing useState from React. This hook manages state within the component. And after that comes the counter. So counter component from counter that we have created, this child component will display the counter and the button from the user interaction. Now again we are importing this style.css from the style app that we have created. After this comes the app components. So inside the app component, useState0 initializes a count state variable with the initial value of 0. And after that, count holds the current count and setCount is a function that updates the value. So state in React is persistent across renders, meaning count will retain the value until it's updated by setCount. And after that comes the event handlers. These functions are used to update the count state based on the user actions. First of all, we have the increment. So it increases the count by 5 each time it is called by executing setCount count plus 5. And then on we have is decrement. It decreases the count by 1 each time it is called. And then we have this reset. So reset sets count back to 0 by calling the setCount 0. So by defining these functions, the component becomes interactive, allowing user to modify the state and see the changes reflected in the real time. So that's it for the app.js. We'll just save this file. We'll just save the counter.js, and after that, let us move on to the style.css. So after writing counter.js, app.js, and we are just going to keep the index.js as it is. We have just excluded the codes. Those were not necessary. So we have already seen those in the first counter app that we created for Hello World. So now we'll just save the index.js, and for styling.css, first of all we have just styled the body using the font family, display, justify content, alignment of items, height and the background color. After that we have styled the app using these styling techniques, and then we have styled the counter. After that we have styled the button, and that's it. We have made the button hover. So that's it for the styling. Now we have created the counter app. Here we learned about 3 concepts: the properties, the state and the event listeners. So these are the 3 core components that we have learned. And now we'll just save this project and we'll run our project. So here is the counter app that we have created. So when we are clicking on increment, the count is incrementing by 5. When we are clicking on decrement, it is decrementing by 1. And after clicking the reset button, it is being reset to 0. So this is the simple app that we have created using props, states and event listeners. So now that we have a proper idea about prop, state and event listeners, we'll now move on further and we'll just create our Mario game. So before that, as we have now understanding about the prop, state and event listener, so basically what are components? So all the files that you can see inside the source are components of the React. So app.js is one component, counter.js is one component, index.js is one component. So again, the other core concept of React was JSX. So this right here, the code that we are able to see is basically JSX syntax. So basically this is a JavaScript code, but we have written HTML inside the JavaScript file. So this is called JSX. So now we have clarity about the core concepts of React. First of all, the components. Here are the components. Then the JSX. These are the JSX. And after that we have properties. These are the properties. And then these are the event handlers. And we have also seen the state management. So after that we have this styling. So that's it about the increment project, and I hope you are clear with the concept of prop, states and event handlers. So now that we have clear understanding of the concepts of React, we'll be starting our Mario game. So let us now understand how we created this Mario game using React. So first of all, we'll start with the sources. In this, there is a section named asset. In this, we have included the audio, font and the images that we are going to use. So after this, we are going on the section of components. So inside this components, we have one section that is atoms. In this, we have included all the components that are being used in this game. For example, we are using birds, bricks, clouds, key message, obstacles, sun and all. So after this, we have this molecules. In this, we have included the footer, the loading screen, Mario the character and the mobile controls. Again, we have included the title and the score. So now one by one, we are going to have a look on these codes. So first of all, let us start with birds. So inside birds, there is a section of bird.js. So first of all, we are importing the use effect and the use state from the React. And after that, we are importing the bird.css from the style sheet file. So first of all, here isReady is a piece of state that starts as a false. It will later be set to true when the document is fully loaded. And after this, the use effect hook runs after the component mounts. It defines a function setLoad that sets isReady to true. So after that, this part checks if the document is ready to fully load it. If it is, it calls the setLoad immediately. If not, it adds the event listener for the load event, which will call setLoad once the page finishes loading. The cleanup function removes the event listener if the component unmounts or if the effect runs again. At last, we have the return statement. The component return a div containing another div for the birds. The class name of the inner div changes based on the isReady state. If isReady is true, it adds the class birdAnimate, which likely triggers an animation. So that's it about the bird.js. Now let us look at the bird.css. So for that, first of all, we have provided this GIF, and then we have included the background repeat as no repeat, background size, height, width, position, top and left. Then we have provided the bird animation, and after that we have provided the keyframes and media queries. So that we are already familiar with what are keyframes and media queries. So now after bird.js we have bricks.js. So again in bricks.js, the component imports the use effect and use state from React to handle the state and a lifecycle events. So it also imports the CSS file bricks.css to style the components. And after that we have this const isReady. So here isReady is a piece of state initialized to false. This state will eventually determine whether the animation of the brick is active or not. After that we have is use effect. The use effect hook runs when the component mounts. It defines the function setLoad that sets isReady to true. And after that we have this if-else statement. This part checks if the document is fully loaded, and if it is, document.ready state is complete, it immediately calls setLoad. If the document is not loaded yet, it adds an event listener for the load event, which will call setLoad once the page finishes loading. The cleanup function removes the event listener if the component unmounts or if the effect runs again. And after that we have this return statement. The component returns a div with a class bricks container. Inside it there is another div for the bricks. The class name of this inner div changes based on the isReady state. If isReady is true, it adds a class brickAnimate, which likely triggers the animation. So after this brick.js, we move on to brick.css. So again in brick.css, we have given this background image, and the styling that we have included is background repeat, background size, height, width, position, bottom and left. Next on we have brickAnimate. These are the animation that we have provided, and after that the keyframes and the media queries. So now after birds and bricks, let us move on to the clouds. So again in cloud.js, we have included all these functions just like brick.js and cloud.js. So you can just pause this and go through the code again. It is basically the same function. We are just importing the cloud.css and we have changed this return statement. So after this again we have cloud.css. We have included the background image, background repeat, background size, height, width, position, top and left. Again we have included the clouds animation and keyframes and media queries. You can just pause this video and go through the code once, and if you have any doubt you can just comment in the comment section. After that we have this key-message.js. Inside this key.js, first we have imported the key-message.css for the styling. So inside this we have basically created one press container, and we have given two paragraphs including enter key and space key. So here enter key is for starting the game and space key is for jump. So after that we have included obstacles. So now let us look at the obstacle.js code. So inside this obstacle.js, first of all, the component imports the CSS styling, images for the obstacle and necessary hooks from the React. It also imports a Redux hook from the state management. So after that, dispatch is used to send actions to the Redux store. IsPlay and speed are selected from the Redux state, where isPlay indicates if the game is running and the speed represents the current speed of the game. So now after that, we have this use effect that sets up the interval that runs every 100 milliseconds. It dispatches action to update the Redux store from the current dimensions and positions of the both obstacles by accessing their boundaries rectangles through the refs. Each property, height, left, top, width are getting updated from the both obstacle. So after that, we have one more use effect. So this use effect runs whenever the speed value changes. If the speed is non-negative, it sets the timeout to adjust the speed to the small value after 1 second. This could be used to ensure that the game continue to run smoothly. So after that, we have this return statement. The component returns a container of the obstacles. Each obstacle is represented as an image. This class name changes based on the isPlay state, adding moments classes if the game is active. The style props adjust the animation duration based on the speed, making the animation faster or slower depending upon the game's current speed. So that's it about the obstacle.js. Now we'll move on to the obstacle.css. So here we have provided some basic styling techniques to obstacle container, obstacle 1, 2, and then we have separately styled the obstacle 1 and 2, and then obstacle 1 move, then obstacle 2 move, then we have provided some keyframes and media queries. So again, if you have any doubt, you can just comment down in the comment section, and rest you can pause the video and look at the code. So after this all, we are left with the sun. So we are importing the sun.css for the styling, and we have included one class container, sun container, and then we have given the class name as sun. So again, inside the CSS, we have provided the background image of the sun, which is a GIF form, and then we have provided the styling that includes background repeat, background size, height, width, position, top and right. And again, we have included some media queries into it. So that's it about the atom section. Now we'll move on to the molecules. So inside molecules, what we have done, we have created footer, loading screen, Mario, the character, score and the title. So now we'll just quickly look to the every molecule. So before moving on to the molecules, we have just imported everything that we have created: birds, bricks, clouds, key messages, obstacle and sun. So before moving on to the molecules, here we have imported all of these things. So each line imports the component of specific file path. For example, bird component is imported from the .birds file. The imported components are presumably React components that will be used in the application to render the different parts of the UI. And after that, this line exports all the imported components into single object. By doing this, it allows other modules to import any of these components easily from one central file instead of importing each of them individually from their respective files. So now, first of all, let us look at the Mario character development. So here, the component imports style, images or the Mario character audio files for jump, death sound and various hooks from the React and Redux. So after that, this use dispatch hook allows dispatching actions to the Redux store. Several state values are selected from the Redux store to manage the game state, such as whether Mario is dead, the game is loading, or the Mario's position and the dimensions. Now after that, these selectors retrieve the position and dimension of two obstacles, allowing for the collision detection. Now after that, we have this audio handling. For this, we are using useMemo hook to create audio objects for jump, die and background music. This ensures that these objects are only created once, optimizing the performance. Now after that, this handle key function listens for the key presses. If the enter key is pressed, the game isn't playing. It dispatches an action to set the game as ready. And if the space key is pressed while Mario is not jumping, that triggers the jump and plays the jump sound. After 400 milliseconds, it stops the jump sound and resets its playback time. So after this, right here, you can just pause and have a look at the code one by one, and if you have any doubt, you can just comment in the comment section below. So after this, we have again used this use effect that monitors the Mario's position and checks the collision with the both obstacle. So now if the collision is detected, it dispatches the action to set Mario as dead and plays the dead sound. It also repeats the game score after the short delay. So that's it about the Mario character, and you can just go through the code line by line. This code just shows the use of use effect and how we are controlling the Mario and when the collision is happening to change the state of the Mario and everything. So now let us quickly look at the CSS of Mario. So here for Mario we have given the styling technique which includes width, height, position, bottom and left. Then we have animated the jump, and then we have added the keyframe, and then we have added the animation if Mario dies and keyframe again for that, and we have added some media queries. So now after the Mario character development, let us quickly look at the footer section. So this component imports the CSS file for styling which would typically define how the footer looks. And after that, this defines the functional component named footer. Functional components are simpler way to create the components in the React. And after that, we have this return statement. Inside this div, it displays the text copyright followed by the current year, which is dynamically obtained from the new date get full year. This ensures that the copyright year is always up to the date without the manual change. It also includes the anchor tag that links the placeholder. The target blank attribute makes the link open in the new tab, and then REL adds the security feature to prevent the new page from accessing the previous ones. And that's it for the footer section. Now, this line basically exports the footer component as a default export of the module, making it available for import in the other files. So that's it for the footer section JS. Now this is the footer section CSS. We have just styled the copyright button and the copyright link. So now after the footer design, let us look at the loading screen. So inside the loading screen, first of all, we have added the import statements. This imports necessary hooks, use effect and use state from the React, the Mario character image, CSS for styling, and Redux function, set loading screen and use dispatch. So now after this we have added this. This basically declares the functional component named as loading screen. So now after that we have used isReady. So isReady is the state variable initialized to false if it will set to true after the specified delay, indicating that the loading is complete. So again, dispatch is a function from Redux that allows the component to dispatch actions to the store. And after that we have used the use effect. This use effect runs once when the component mounts due to the empty dependency array. It sets the timer for 5 seconds, after which it updates isReady to true, indicating the loading is completed. And then at last we have the return statement. The component renders a div with the class loading screen container. It displays the Mario character image using the image tag. While isReady is false, it shows an H1 element with the text loading. Once isReady is true, it displays the enter button. When the button is clicked, it dispatches the set loading screen false, action likely to update the global Redux state to hide the loading screen. And then at last we have this export default loading screen. So that's it for the loading screen. Now let us look at the CSS of the loading screen. So inside the loading screen CSS, we have provided width, height, position, top, left, bottom, right, background color, color, display, flex direction, justify content, alignment of items, gap and z-index. Then we have styled the Mario loading, then the loading title and then the enter button. After that we have provided this hover effect to the enter button. So that's it. You can go through the code line by line, and again that is it for the loading screen. So now let us move on to the mobile controls. Again we have added the imports here. And after that we have added this mobile controls. This defines the functional component that is named as mobile controls. And after that we have added this is play Mario jump is die. So this indicates if the game is currently being played. Mario jump indicates whether the Mario is currently jumping. Is die indicates if the game is over, and dispatch is used to send the action to the Redux store. After that we have used use memo to create an audio object for the jump sound This ensures that the audio is only created once for the performance efficiency. And after that, this function is triggered when the start button is clicked. It checks if the game is not already playing, and if it is not over, if the both conditions are met, it dispatches an action to set the game to ready. And after that, we have created this function. This function is called when the jump button is clicked. It checks if the Mario is not already jumping, and if he isn't, it dispatches an action to set him as jumping. Plays the jump sound after 400 milliseconds. It stops the sound and resets the playback time. And at last we have this return statement. So in this, the component renders the div with the class mobile controls container. It conditionally renders the start button when the game is not playing or not over. Again, the over button when the game is over. The jump button when the game is playing. And at last again we have this export statement. And now again we have the styling of mobile controls. So here is the media query and then the mobile controls container. And after that we have styled the start button, jump button and control button. Again we have styled these buttons by applying the filters. And we have given the background color. And then we have given the background color to the control jump button. So that's it for the CSS of mobile controls and the JS of mobile controls. You can go through the code line by line and again comment down if there is any doubt. Now at last we'll move on to the calculation of the score. So now we are at the score.js. Again we have added the import statements that imports the necessary hooks from React Redux function and CSS file. So after that we have this declaration. This defines the functional component named as score. And after that we have used this query selectors for score, last score, play, die and dispatch. So the score shows the current score from the Redux store and the last score shows the last score recorded. And the play is basically a boolean indicating if the game is currently being played. Die is basically a boolean indicating if the game is over. And dispatch is a function that is used to dispatch the action of the Redux store. And after that we have included this high score. This basically initializes the state variable high score. It retrieves the high score from local storage, passing it as an integer or defaults to 0 if the high score is not found. So after that we have used this use effect. This use effect runs whenever the dependencies change. That means incrementing the score if the game is being played or not over. It sets the time out to increment the score by 1 to every milliseconds. And then updating the last score and the high score. And after that, we have the return statement. So this component basically renders the div with the class score container. If the game is currently being played, it displays the current score. If the game is over, it displays the last score. It always displays the high score along with that. And at last, we again have the export statement. So that's it for the score.js. And we'll move on to the score.css. So for score.css, we have just applied these styling techniques, including the media query and the styling of high score. So after that, last one we have is title. So inside this title.js, first of all, the component imports the CSS file for styling, ensuring that the component has desired looks. So again, after that, we have this const title. This basically defines the functional component named as title. And after that, we have this return statement. So the component returns the div with a class named title container, which acts as a wrapper for the title elements. Inside this div, an image element displays the Mario logo. It uses the imported Mario image as a source and it has the class Mario logo for styling. And h1 element contains the text Mario jump, styled with the class title. This serves as the main title of the game. And again we have the export default title. So here is the styling. So first of all, here we have styled the container. Then we have styled the Mario logo, then title, and then we have added the media queries. So that's it for the title. Now let us quickly go through this index.js file. So here each line imports the specific component from the corresponding directories. So footer displays the copyright information, loading screen shows the loading animation and enter button. Mario represents the character and mobile controls provide the button for the mobile users. Score displays the current, last and the high score. Title basically displays the game title. And after that, this line of code exports all the imported components as named export. This means that when importing from this module elsewhere, you can access each component by its name. So again, in the other index.js file, we have exported the atoms and the molecules. So that's it. We have covered all the atoms and the molecules that we have made for the Mario game. So now what we are going to do is we are going to run our project. So for running our project, we are just going to add the command and then we'll be able to run our project. So here we are going to add the command to run our project. So we are just going to write, that's it. We are going to give the command as npm start and it will start our project. So here is our game. Here is the output of our Mario game. It is the landing page. We can just click on enter and it is basically the screen. Here we have the enter key. We have to press the enter key to start the game and then we have to press the space key to jump. Here we calculate the score, the high score. We have added these GIFs of birds, clouds, sun and the bricks, and here we have the Mario character. So here is the footer. Basically we have designed the copyright and this is the title. So this is the whole project that we have created using the React. So I'll just quickly enter key and now I can see the game has been started. So again I can jump using the space key and my score is being calculated here. My current score and the high score is being calculated here. So this is the final project that we have created using React.
Now let's get into the main concept. That is, what is conditional rendering in ReactJS? Okay, let's see the definition. In React, you can create distinct components that encapsulate behavior you need. Then you can render only some of them depending on the state of your application. So when you are building some React applications, we might often need to show or hide some HTML on some certain conditions, right? So in simple words, what is conditional rendering? Conditional rendering is nothing but if a given statement is true, then the if statement executes, or else the else statement will execute. So we have an example here for a better clarification. Now let's imagine a person is appearing for an exam and the candidate must score 50%. So this is the condition here. So if the candidate scores 50%, then only he will pass this exam, or else he will fail. So this might be considered as a simple real-life conditionally rendering statement or an if-else statement. And also I have an interesting fact here. Conditional rendering in React works the same way the conditions works in JavaScript. Okay, next we have different methods in rendering. So let's see what are all they. First is if-else statement, then element variables, ternary operators, and finally short circuit operators. Let's see each of it in a detailed form. Here first we have if-else statement. An if-else statement will execute the action contained in the if block when the condition is satisfied. Otherwise, it will execute the actions contained in the else block. So now let's check this in a simple syntax and see here we have a condition which is to be evaluated and we have a statement inside the if block. So this will execute when the condition there will satisfy, or else the statement in the else block will be executed. Now let's see this in a practical way. Now I am using Visual Studio Code as a code editor. Okay, now you can see I have a user.js file opened here and we have app.js here. I have included user here and also imported the user file here. Okay, now let's start coding. Now first and foremost we have a scenario here. So let's imagine there are two persons, one person from
the Edureka team, and another person is not a Edureka team person. Now, the person from Edureka, if he signed in or if he log into this page, and he must see a welcome page. And if the non-Edureka person signs in here, he must see a please sign in page before he signs in. So that is what we are going to design today with a simple if-else statement first, and we will see the other conditionally rendered methods also. So we will start coding here. So first we will import React. Here I have the export default user. So this helps me to import the user here. So we have to define it here for better practice. Now I have imported React here. Then I am declaring a class user extend react.component, and also I am constructing a prop, and I'm creating a superclass. And here I am giving the condition this.state logged in false. Here I am giving false because the user will not be a member first, then after he signs in he will become a member. So I am default keeping here as a false. Okay, then I am rendering this. Const is logged in, this state is logged in. Okay. Here I am returning the condition and return the statement. Now I am writing the else part. Return please sign in for happy learning in Edureka. Yeah. Now here you can see as I have kept the state as false. So default the React will work in local host 3000. So here you can see the output, please sign in for happy learning in Edureka, as I have kept the state as false. Now here I will give the styles for a visible changes you can see in the website. So I am giving the style part. Okay, yeah, this is image, and I have given a simple style part here. So now if I keep the state as true, then this welcome to Edureka page with an image should be executed. So let's see. Yeah, you can see here welcome to Edureka with a Edureka page image background. And if I do false, then yeah, you can see please sign in for happy learning in Edureka. Okay, and also the thing is the if-else statement does not work inside the JSX because if-else statement is not a valid syntax inside the ReactJS. Now you might be thinking, what is JSX? JSX is JavaScript XML. It makes the code easier to write and add HTML into the ReactJS. Now let's see what is element variables. Element variables are simple to approach to extract the conditional render into a function. Element variables are variables that holds JSX elements. You can conditionally assign elements or components to these variables outside the JSX and only render the variables within JSX. Now, we use JavaScript variables to store elements, right? So this will also help us conditionally render an entire component or only a part of component, while the rest of the output does not change here. So this is one of the benefit. Also, it holds JSX element inside this. So this is an advantage. So let's see the syntax. Here we have a variable and the same if-else statement with the variables assigned to the statements. So let's see. Here this variable is a memory for the values, or the value will be stored in this variables, and this is the same as the condition which is to be evaluated, and we have a statement. So this statement is assigned to this variable. Whether the condition is true, then this statement will be executed to the user, or else the else part will be executed to the user. Now we will see the practical example in the Visual Studio Code. Now you can see I am editing in the same code. I am not changing anything here. I am just eliminating the if-else statement from here. Okay. And now we have import, and here we are using a variable. So I am using a variable button. For that I have created a button here as a login button and a logout button here as well. Okay. Now I want to import these two buttons into my user.js file. So let's do that. I will import logout button here and import login button. Okay. Now here these both are the child components of greetings. So I want this greeting to be imported in user.js as well. So let's do that. Import greeting. Yeah, now you can see, right? Now I want this to be returned. So I will return dev greeting is logged in. Okay, which is equals to, okay, this is the state. Fine. Now we are using button, right? So I am declaring here the button. Okay, now let's write the main syntax. Let button, then I am writing if statement. If is logged in, button is equal to logout button on click. So we are giving a event here, that is on click, this dot handle logout click. Okay, now you might think where this handle came from. I'll explain. Now let's give else part also. Copy pasting this. But here log in. Okay. We have here handle logout and login click. So we have to give here also. So we are giving this dot handle login click is equal to this dot handle login click dot bind this. Okay, so this is the event handler dot bind this. Okay, and also we have to give the state handle login this dot set state. So I'm setting the state here as is logged in true. Okay, now same thing for logout button, giving false. Okay, now this should work. You can see a login button here which didn't have previously for if-else statement, and you can see the changes here. Now I am not a user of Edureka, then I should get this page. Once I log in, then I should get welcome back to Edureka page. Okay, so this is what the element variable statement. Here I am assigning the values to this button. If I click the button over there, then the handle login click should give me true value and logout click should give me false value. Okay, I hope you all understood the if-else and element variables. Next in our list is ternary operators. Let's see. The conditional ternary operator is the only JavaScript operator that takes 3 operands. This operator is frequently used as a shortcut for if-else statement. Okay, now let's see the syntax here. We have a condition over here. This is the condition is to be evaluated with a question mark. So this question mark means if the condition is true or false. If it is true, then this statement will be executed. If false, then the statement will be executed. So here the colon is the else part, is the difference between true and false part. Now let's check this also in terms of practical way. This is the simple way of writing any conditional rendering. Here we have the same thing as the element variable. Here we have to just change the if, and you can see here I'm giving the question mark here and I'm taking off this else. I'm just assigning the colon. Yeah, with only these 2 changes here, the code will be working. I am setting this to true for changing. So you can see welcome back to Edureka. With just 3 changes, we are getting the same output here. Okay, see, log out. So I'm getting this page. If I log in, I should get this page. Okay. Next, we have an interesting operator, that is short circuit operator. Short circuit evaluation is a technique used to ensure that there are no side effects during the evaluation of the operands in an expression. The logical AND operation helps you specify that an action should be taken only on one condition, otherwise it would be ignored entirely. Here, the approach is a specific case of this ternary operator that we just learned. Now, when we want to render something or nothing, then we use short circuit operator. Now, let us see the syntax. Yes, this is the syntax. Now, here the expression is first evaluated from the left hand side of the operand. Okay? And if it is true, then it is evaluated. See, the condition is to be evaluated, and this is the logical operator, and this is the expression. If the condition is true, then this expression will be evaluated. If the condition is false, you will not get any kind of output here. So this is the beauty of short circuit operator. Then we'll see in the practical way. Here I have the same code, just I have taken the buttons here. I don't want that button, so here I am writing the syntax, return this state logged in, and AND operation, and I'm giving the style, and welcome back to Edureka. Okay. Yes, here we have the value as true, so let's check the output. Yeah, welcome to Edureka, and I will change here, welcome back to Edureka. See, welcome back to Edureka. Now, if I change this to false, so let's see what. See, there is no output. So that is what I mentioned you before. If the condition is true, then this output will be executed. If false, you will return nothing. So this is the end of the conditional rendering. Now we will learn how to prevent component from rendering. In rare case, you might want a component to hide itself, right? Even though it was rendered by another component. To do this, return null instead of its render output. So returning null from a component's renders method does not affect the firing of the component's lifecycle method. So now I'm taking you through the online compiler. I'm using JSPable. This is a converter of the JavaScript. Now here we have a function called warning banner and we have props and I am returning null here. Okay, so we are writing a warning sign. Let me change here. I will write danger. Okay, you can see the visible changes here itself. Danger. Okay, here we have a page extension and I am giving this true. Here we have handle toggle click and I am giving has hide and show. Now if we click on hide, so the message will be hidden from rendering. Now I want to show this message, then we can show. Here from returning null, if we hide, then you will not get any of the output here. So this is also a kind of short circuit operator, but here you will not get any of the side effects by giving the return as null. Now let us go and explore all about ReactJS hooks. Starting from what is ReactJS hooks. ReactJS hooks are functions that allow you to use the state and other React features in functional components. They were actually introduced in React 16.8 as a way to make it easier to share the stateful logic between the components and also to make it easier to work with the functional components. Here, the most commonly used hooks are the useState, useEffect, and useContent. So these are considered more important or most useful hooks. So other than this, we will also explore some of the additional hooks too. For example, useReducer, useMemo, useCallback, and useLayoutEffect. So these are the hooks that we will be exploring in this session. We will see each of it in a detailed form right now. Before that, we will see what actually the hooks are. Now let us go back and see before React hooks. So before React hooks, if you wanted to use the state or other features in the component, then you had to use a class component. Here the class component are more complex than the functional components and can make it difficult to reuse the stateful logic. Here with the React hook, you can use the state and other features in the functional component, which makes it easier to share the stateful logic between the components. And also it makes it easier to work with the functional components. Here the React hooks differ from the traditional React class component because in that they allow you to use the state and other features in the functional components instead of having to use the class components. And additionally, you must keep this in mind. Here the React hooks do not require the use of this keyword, which makes them less verbose and easier to understand. And why do we say here the class component is more difficult? So here the class component in React are based on this JavaScript class syntax, which can make them difficult to understand for the developers who are new to the React or who are more familiar with the functional programming. Additionally, these class components often include the boilerplate code, such as the constructor, functions, and binding the methods to the correct context, which can add unnecessary complexity and make the code harder to maintain. And the most important feature of this React hook is it allows the creation of custom hooks, which are reusable functions that can hold the state or the logic that can be shared between the multiple components. Here, this makes it easy to extract and reuse the logic that is used in the multiple components. So at the end, this can make the code base more maintainable and easier to understand. One of the main advantages of React Hook is that they make it easier to share the stateful logic between the components, as I said in the previous statement. So this is because the state and the logic can be extracted into a single hook, and it can be reused in multiple components, rather than having to duplicate the logic in multiple class components. React Hook also make it easier to test the functional components since they do not rely on this keyword and the lifecycle methods. Now let us see the types of hooks we have in this session. Here we have three major hooks, that is use state, use effect, and use context. So these are considered to be basic hooks and more important hooks or commonly used hooks. And additionally, we will also look into use reducer, use memo, use callback, and finally use layout effect. So these are the hooks which we will be covering in this session. Other than this, we also have many other hooks. So if you want to learn more about hooks or more about ReactJS, you can enroll to our Edureka's ReactJS certification training course, where we will be providing you with an hands-on and live demo sessions. So here, we will get started with our first hook, that is use state. So let us see what is use state and how does it work in our code, and I will give some of the tips that how can you use the use state inside the code. Now, according to the definition, use state is a hook in React that allows you to add the state to the functional component. State is a way of storing and managing the data that can change over time and can affect the component's behavior and rendering, though I will explain it in a detailed form. Here, this use state is a hook in React that allows you to manage the state in the functional component. Prior to the introduction of hooks, the state management in React was only possible in class-based components. So, with this use of use state, you can now manage the state in the functional component as well. And also, the use state is a function that takes a single argument, so which is the initial state. After that, it returns an array with two elements, that is, current state and a setter function for updating the state. The current state is a value of the state, and the setter function is used to update the state. So here I will explain this in a detailed form with an example. So I am using Visual Studio Code. So here I will show you a small demo. For that, I will jump into Visual Studio Code. Now, as you can see, I have already created an app called Counter app. So you can see here the Counter app, and here I have created a counter.jsx inside the source folder and inside the components folder. Now let us write a small React hook example. First, I will import the React component from React. For that, write just import React from React. Okay. After that, I will import useStateHook from the React package after this line. For that, you just need to write import in the bracket useState. So you will have some of the recommendations over here, and you need to find useState over here. So state. And you can notice that I am writing in a camel case statement. Here, the ReactJS takes the import in a camel case. After this, now that we have imported the component and use state from React, at the same time, we need to export this file to the index.js, right? So that the output will be shown in the browser. So that don't forget to export this file to the index.js. So I will export. So just type export default counter because my file name is counter. So I'm writing counter. And you just need to go inside the index.js and include the counter file inside the React strict node. Now let us get back to the counter.js file. So now let us declare a new state variable. So let us call this as count. Here the useState returns a pair of value, that is the current state and the function that updates it, as I said in the explanation. So that we will just write a function called counter. Inside that just write const and pass the values, that is the current state and the function that updates it, right? So here the current state is this count, and then we will set the count. So this will be the function that updates it. And in our component we use the useState hook by invoking it and passing the initial value for our state variable, which is 0. So I'll use that. So I'm using the useState. So I'm passing the value as 0. Okay. Now let us return this. So I'm wrapping this with a div tag. Now here we use the count variable to display the current number of clicks in the page. And in the button tag, here we use this onClick property to specify a function that will be called when the button is clicked, right? Now for that I will write a paragraph to indicate the numbers. So I'm writing you clicked. Here I'm calling the count, and this count will be indicated in numbers. So you have clicked this many times. So right? So I will give the button to click. So on click. So I'm calling this set function. So that is set count. This S should be in a small. Here the function that we pass to on click is an arrow function that calls the set count and passes in the new value of the count. So which is the current value plus 1. So let us write the count, that is the current value, and plus 1. So whenever the button is clicked, here the count will be incremented like the current value plus 1. So the count will be incremented to 1. So I'll close the button by telling click. Okay. So let us run this by typing npm start, and you can see the server has started. You can see that we have written you clicked this many times, right? So let us click this button and check. So here you can see the number is incrementing. So if I click on this, the number is changed the value to 2. So that the current value is right now is 2. So if I click the button once again, the number will be incremented plus 1. So that the current value plus 1 will be incremented. So here as you can see, the count, this is the current value and plus 1. So every time the button is clicked, this function will be called and the state variable count will be updated. And here the component will be re-rendered to reflect the new value. So I hope you understood. Now I will give you some of the tips to use the useState. Here we have some of the limitations. For example, keep state update simple. Here you need to avoid the complex logics or the calculations when updating the state. Instead, use a callback function to update the state based on its current value. And next, so you need to keep in mind that you need to use the useState when it is only necessary. Here, use props or the context when possible, instead of creating the state for every piece of data. After that, you need to use the use effect hook for the side effects. Keep the state top level. That means you need to keep the state at the top level of your component hierarchy, as opposed to buried deeply in class component. This makes it easier to understand and debug the code easier. And you need to keep in mind that you need to test your components. Always you need to test your component to make sure that they work correctly and the state updates are behaving as expected. With that, we will move on to the next hook, that is use effect. Now, let us explore about use effect. Here, this use effect is a hook in React that allows you to synchronize a components with an external system. Also, it will allow you to tell that React to run a piece of code after rendering in order to update the system or the side effects of the component. So, this is done by specifying a callback function that contains the code to run and an array of dependencies, which are variables that components uses and that React will watch for changes. Now, when the component is first rendered, the callback function passes to the use effect will be run. This is similar to the component did mount lifecycle method in the class component. If any of the dependencies specified in the dependency array change, React will rerun the effect. Now, this is also similar to the component did update lifecycle method in the class component. So, as I said before, here we have class did mount, class did update, and class did unmount. So, these lifecycle methods are used in the class component. So, here the next lifecycle I'll be explaining is component will unmount. Here, when the component is unmount, the cleanup function passes to the use effect when it will be run. This is for cancelling network requests or cleaning up any other side effects that were created. Now that we will understand this use effect hook with a small example. So I'll go back to the Visual Studio Code. I will clean up the use state. I will keep the React component and the export as default. Now, we need to use the use state and use effect from the React. So for that, we will import use effect along with the use state from the React package after the React component line. So that I will just import inside the curly braces, write use effect and use state. Right? In our component, we declare a state variable data using this use state. And the initial value is an empty array. So for that, we will just write a function for that. Counter. So for that, I will be setting the constant values here. And I'll pass both width and the set width. As I said, the current value and the function that will be updated. So here width is the current value and I'll set the state So now what does this line mean? So here I have written this line, right? Now this means that I am taking the window's inner width. So let us see. For example, I want the inner width of the browser and I need to design a web page where my grid needs to match it. So I need to know the width of my system or the browser. So that I am taking the inner width of the browser. Now let us fetch the use effect. I am taking the function handle resize. So we need to know the size of our window, right? So that is why we are using this function handle. Now I will set the width for window inner width. Here, the setWidth function updates the state when the browser window is resized. Now, let us set the window event listener. Here, the use effect hook is used to add an event listener to the window that is listens for a resize event. And when the resize event is triggered, the handle resize function is called. For that, we are writing a code here. So for that, window dot add event listener, and I am specifying here resize. Here, as I said, when the resize is triggered, the handle resize will be called to update the width of the state in the new value of the window's inner width. Now here let us clean up the function to remove the event listener. Here now I will return the remove event listener. Here I am specifying this window dot remove event listener. Here the empty array at the end of the use effect is the dependencies. It means this effect only runs once on the component mount, right? So here now I will return this also. So I'm writing the Windows width will be. So I'm calling this width function here. Here the component returns a div that displays the current width of the browser, right? Now let us check out the results. Here the window width is 614. Now let us resize this. Here, as you can see, if I resize, the Windows width changed to 335. So if I again resize, so it will change according to that. So it will not change the height. So as if we have just said only for the width. The total window width of my system is 614. So if I resize, so it will change according to the size we move to. So I hope you understood the example with the use effect. Here some of the tips to practice this use case in a best way. For that, you need to first understand the purpose of the use case of the use effect hook. Here it is used to handle the side effects. So as I said in the example, such as the data fetching in a functional component. And always you need to include a dependency array as the second argument to the use effect. And this array should include any variables or state that the effect depends on. Here, if a variable is not included in the dependency array, that the effect will run on every render. And you should be mindful of the order in which effect runs. Here, these effects are executed in the order that they defined. So it is important to consider that the order of your effects if they are dependent on each other. And you should use the cleanup function provided by the use effect to remove any side effects before the component is unmounted. So this is especially important for the data fetching and subscriptions to prevent the memory leaks. So as I did here in the example, I did the cleanup function to remove the event listener, right? So like that. And also you should keep in mind that the excessive use of use effect can lead to unnecessary re-renders and it can be slow down your applications. And also you can use the use context hook instead of use effect when possible. Here the use context is a simpler and more efficient way to manage the shared state across the multiple components. That is what we are looking next. We will look into the use context here. Now let us see what is use context. It is a kind of hook that is used to consume the context in a functional component. It is an alternate to the context type property or the consumer component that were used in the class component. Here, when a component needs to access the context, it can use the use context hook to describe to the context and retrieve its current value. The hook takes the context object as its argument and returns the current value of the context. The component can then use this value to update its state or props. The use context hook allows a component to subscribe to changes in context so that it can re-render when the context value changes. So this is done without the need to pass props down manually through every level of the component tree, which makes the code more efficient and maintainable. Here, when a context value changes, the React will re-render all the components that are using that context. This means that the component using useContextHook will be re-rendered too, which is how the component will get updated with the new context value. Now, if I summarize the use context, the use context hooks allows the functional component to access the context and the subscribe to changes in context. It also eliminates the need to pass the property through the multiple levels of the component tree, eventually, which leads to more efficient and maintainable code. Now, let us see a small example. So, let us go to Visual Studio Code and I will just remove from the function. So, default, let us keep import React component from React. Here in import, we will just import the create context with use context. Okay. So now let us create a context with a default value. For that, I am writing the const and theme context. Here we use this create context to create a new context called this theme context. Okay. With the default value of light. So I'll keep the default value as light, which is equal to create context to light, right? Fine. Now let us create a function counter. Now let us use the context to access the current theme, right? So that I am specifying the const. Now the theme is, we are using the use context in theme context. Here in our example component, we use the use context hook to access the current value of the theme context, right? So here we have light. So we need to access this light in this theme context. Here we will return the div. So let us specify the class name as theme, right? And let me write something like the current. So we need to get the output from this theme. So when the value changes here, the value here will be also changed accordingly. Now here, let me write a function called app and return the theme context dot provider value is dark. So I am specifying the counter over here inside the theme context. Right, now let us see the output. Here, as you can see, the current theme is light, right? We access the value of the context in this case. Here the theme, and we use it to set the class name of the div element. And in the app component, we wrap the element component with the theme context provider and set the value to the dark. Okay. Here now, whether the value is provided to the context will be available to all the components that are wrapped inside the theme context provider. And all of them will be able to access the current value of the context by calling the use context and theme context. Okay. Now here some of the tips to practice the use context. Here, to keep the context value minimal, only store the values that are necessary for the components that are consuming the context. And you need to avoid the storing unnecessary data, as it can lead to unnecessary re-renders and performance issue. And also you need to use the default values. Always provide the default values for the context when creating it, in case that consuming the component does not have access to the context. Now you should use the use context for global state so that it is shared across the multiple components, such as the user's authenticated status or the selected theme. Also, you need to avoid using context for local state. Here, use state hooks for local state that is specific to single component rather than using the context. Only update context when necessary. You should only update the context when the value has changed to avoid the unnecessary re-renders and performance issues. Here, you need to use the use effect hook to update the context. The next we have the test context. Test the context value and update to ensure that they are working correctly. Here we use the test context to test the value that were updated correctly and whether it is working correctly. Now then we have the use multiple context. So here if you have multiple pieces of global state and that need to be shared, here we need to consider using the multiple context to keep the state organized and easy to manage. With that, we will move on to use reducer hook. Here, the use reducer is a hook in React that allows for managing the state within a functional component. Here, it is similar to use state, but it is typically used for more complex state management. And the state reducer hook takes two arguments, a reducer function and an initial state. Here, the reducer function is a pure function that takes the current state and an action, and it returns the next state. The initial state is the starting state of the component state. A component can call the dispatch function returned by the use reducer to send an action to the reducer. Here, the reducer that updates the state based on the action and the current state. And also the component re-renders with the new state. The use reducer is considered more powerful than use state because it allows for more complex state management, such as handling the asynchronous actions and managing the multiple pieces of state at once. In short, the use reducer is a hook that allows you to manage the state within a functional component in a way that it is similar to how you would manage the state in a Redux store. It takes two arguments, a reducer function and an initial state, as I said initially, and returns the current state and a dispatch function that can be used to update the state. Now with that, let us look into a small example. So let me remove from the import again. Let us import the use reducer package from React. After that, we create a reducer function that takes in two arguments, that is state and action. Here, which are the current state and the action that is being dispatched respectively. Okay, so that let's write const. So initially I'm setting the value to count 0. So initial state is count 0. Fine. After that, the function reducer state action. After that, I have switch case. In that, I will write switch. I'll write action type. If that is the case, then the case should be in increment. Then I will return the count to the state count plus 1. If the case is in the decrement, then I will return count state minus 1. Then default, I will return the state. First, let me write the code. and I will be explaining you each and every statement here, right? So that first here I'll write the function. Here, as you know, the useReducer hook returns a pair of values, the current state and a function that updates it. In our case, we use the destructuring assignment to assign the state and dispatch, right? Here, we use the state count to display the current count in the page and in the button tag. Here, for that, I will specify the page and the button tag. Here, for that, I am returning a statement. So, return. Here, I am writing the count. Here, count and the state count. Now, let us specify the button for increment as well as the decrement. Here, on click, let us write the dispatch. So this type will be in increment. Fine. Now for the same, I will give for decrement. Right. See here. Here I am giving the decrement. So after that, the div is closed. So here the function that passes in the onClick property to specify a function that will be called when the button is clicked. So I'll be showing that in the output page. Here the function that we have passed to onClick is an arrow. That function calls dispatch and it passes in the object that describes the action that should be performed. Here in this case, the action type is either increment or decrement, right? So when the component is rendered, it was initially the number is 0. The count is 0. So when the button is clicked in the increment, so it will call the dispatch function with the type increment. And the reducer function will receive the action and the state so that it will update the state and increment by 1. So see, for example, if I go to the output, so if the button is clicked in the increment, so the count will be 2. For example, if I increment 1, so the count will be plus 1, right? So when the minus button or the decrement button is clicked, so it will call the dispatch function to the decrement. Then the reducer function will receive the action and the state. So it will update the state and decrease by the count 1. And the component will re-render and it will show us the output as minus 1. So count minus 1. So here keep your state and the action simple. Now let me give you some of the tips. Here you need to keep your state and action simple. The useReducer is designed to handle the complex state and actions, but it is important to keep them as simple as possible to avoid the confusions and make it easier to debug. And also, you should use the initial state correctly. Make sure to provide an initial state that is the same type and shape as the state in your reducer function. And the use actions to change the state. You need to use the actions to change the state in your reducer. So do not modify the state directly as this can lead to unexpected behavior. Also, you need to keep your reducer function pure. So what that? Your reducer function should be pure means it should not have any side effects and should not rely on any external state or variables. So with that, we will move on to the use memo. Use memo is a hook that allows you to optimize the performance of your React component by only recalculating a value when one of its dependencies has changed. Now, it is similar to the use effect hook. in that it allows you to perform a side effect. But instead of updating the component state or props, it returns a value that can be used by the component. Here, the useMemo hook takes two arguments as previous hooks takes. The first one is a function that returns the value you want to store, and the second one is an array of dependencies. The function is only called when one of the dependencies has changed. If none of the dependencies have changed, the previous value is returned instead of recalculating the value. For example, if you have a component that displays a list of items and the list is passed in as a prop, you can use the useMemo to only refilter the list when the search item changes, instead of refiltering the list on every render. Now let us see a small example. So now let us go to Visual Studio Code. I just have import React component from React and I have exported the counter. Now let me import the hooks from the React. So I'm importing useState and useMemo, right? Now let us define a functional component called counter. Okay, so function counter. Now let us create the state variable for first name, last name and age. So that constant first is our first name. Then I will set the first name. Here I will use the useState. Same thing for last name and age. I am giving a empty parameter over here so that it is dynamically updated when the user enters the first name, last name and the age. Okay, right. Now let us calculate the user object over here. So now let us see. This function will rerun only if the first name, last name or the age state variable have changed. So I am giving the user also. So const user by using the useMemo. So let us return the full name, the full name consists of the first name and the last name. And finally age, right? In the array, I'm just giving the first name, last name and age. Return. Inside the div, I'm just giving the input value for the first name, last name and the age. Here the component also uses the useMemo here, right? So this hook can create a memorized object called the user. So that is why we have specified the user over here. And that combines the first name, last name and the age, the state variable, into a single object with properties, that is first name and the age. The components then renders input field that allows the user to update the state variables and display the user object. So that is what. So here I will be giving the input values over here. Here first one is the first name. On change, so if the value is changed, then the output should be re-rendered. Here in the age, we have to type the number. So the input value will be in the form of number. right? Then let me give a paragraph inside saying the full name and the age. Now let us see the output. So if I show you the output, here I can type my name. So here in the full name, you will get the first name and this is the last name. So for example, I'll type V. So as you can see, the full name I have written in the first name as Tejaswini and the last name has V. So in the code here, it should return in the name of full name is the first name plus the last name and the age, right? So here, if you see, in the place of first name, I have typed only my first name, and in the last name, and in the place of age, since I given in the input has numbers, so it will tell you to increment or decrement, or else you can even type the number. So in place of age, you have the number over here, right? For example, 46. Yeah. And you can increment or decrement as you need. So in this code, the React functional component is called the counter, right? So it uses the React hook called useState and useMemo to manage and update the component state and to perform a calculation based on the state. Here, the component has three state variables, that is the first name, last name, and age. So which are initialized using the useState. Now, these state variables are used to control the values of three input fields rendered in the component JSX, that is these three input fields. Here, the component also has a user variable. So here you can see the user variable, right? Here the function concatenates the first name and the last name, the state variable to create the full name, the property of the user object, and the user age, that state variable as the state property. The second argument of the use memo is array of dependencies, which is used to determine when the calculation should be rerun. In this case, the calculation will rerun only if the first name, last name, or age state variable has changed. The component re-renders an input field from each state variable and displays the full name and age property of the user object. Right, with that, we will move on to the tips for use memo. Use the hook called use memo when you need to compute a value that depends on prop or state but not change often. Always pass a function that runs the value you want to memorize as the first argument. The function should take the props or state that the value depends on an argument. And the use memo with the second argument an array of dependencies to tell that React which values the memorized value depends on. So this will ensure that the memorized value is only recalculated when one of the dependency changes. Avoid using useMemo in render functions as it can lead to poor performances. Instead, you can use it in the component functions that are called before the component re-renders. Also, you need to use the use memo with the 𝐶𝐞 when working with the large data set or the complex computations, as it can cause performance issues if not used correctly. And avoid using the use memo to store functions, as they cannot memorize. Instead, you can use the use callback hook for this purpose. Now let us see use callback hook. Use callback is nothing but it is also a React hook that allows you to optimize the performance of your React component by only recreating a callback function when one of its dependencies has changed. It is similar to use memo, but that allows you to store a value and only update it when the dependencies has changed. But instead of storing a computed value, it stores a callback function. Here, the callback hook takes two arguments. The first one is the callback function that you want to store, and the second is an array of dependencies. Here, the function is only recreated when one of the dependencies has changed. If none of the dependencies have changed, the previous callback is returned instead of creating a new one. For example, if you have a component that displays a list of items and the list is passed in as a prop, you can use the use callback to only recreate the function that handles the recreating the function on every render. But it is important to note that the use callback is often used in the conjunction with the use memo when the dependencies are object or the function. To prevent unnecessary re-renders and recalculations, as use memo only recalculates the value when the reference to the object or functions changes. Now let us see a small example for use callback hook and import the hook packages from React. That is, I'm using the use state and use callback from React. Now the function called counter. Let us initialize the count and the increment value here, right? So that for here I'm writing the const. So I'm setting the count as well by use case, by use state. And the next one is increment. I'm using the use callback function over here. Let's set the count to count +1 because we are incrementing it, right? So, right. Now let us return with a div tag. Inside that I'm writing a h1 tag. So I'm telling the count value. Then I'm specifying the child increment. After this, we have the child increment over here, as you can see, right? So that I'm creating a function over here called child. Inside that, I'm just passing an argument called increment by returning a button with an onClick function increment. Right? Now, in this example, the parent component has a state variable that is count. So as you can see here, we have count. This is the parent component. And the callback function is the increment. That increments by 1. So here the count plus 1. So as you can see, this is the parent component plus incrementing by 1. Here the child component receives the increment function as a prop and renders a button when clicked. And it calls the increment function over here. The use callback hook is used to memorize the increment function, passing in the count as a dependency. This means that the increment function will only be recreated if the count state variables change. So this can help to prevent the unnecessary re-renders of the child components. When you run the code, the output will be an increment button and a h1 tag saying the count is 0. So when you click on the button, the count will be increasing by 1 and the h1 tag will be displaying the updated count, right? So if you can see, I'm clicking on increment and the number changes to 2 by increment plus 1. So 1 plus 1 is 2. Okay. So right, now let us see some of the tips. So here, use the use callback when you need to pass a callback function as a prop to a child component. and you want to avoid the unnecessary re-renders. Always, you need to provide the dependency array as the second argument to use the callback. This tells the React which variables the callback depends on and when it should recreate the callback. And also you need to keep in mind that the dependencies you include in the array, if you include too much or unnecessary dependencies, it can cause the unnecessary re-renders and negatively impact performance. And you need to avoid the use callback inside the loops or conditions, as it can lead to unexpected behavior and hard to debug the issues. And always you need to check if the callback function is the same using the reference equality operator before passing it to a prop. So this will prevent the unnecessary re-renders of the parent component. You need to be careful while using the use callback function. With this, the state or prop that are objects or array, because these are passed by references, not by values. So if the callback depends on such variables, it will be recreated every time the parent component re-renders. And you need to be aware that the use callback does not work with async functions, because it cannot memorize the results of asynchronized operations. Always test your component with and without use callback to check that if it works as expected and that the performance improves you expect as visible. Right? Okay. Now let's move on to the last hook in this session, that is use layout effect. Now, what is use layout effect? Use layout effect is a React hook that allows you to synchronize all layout changes to a component. Here it is similar to the use effect, but it runs synchronously after all DOM mutations. Now, this can be useful when you need to measure a DOM node or read its layout before making changes that affects its size or position. Also, it should be used with caution, as it can cause visual inconsistencies if not used correctly. And also, it is recommended to use effect unless you have a specific use case that requires the synchronous behavior of use layout effect. So you need to be careful while using the use layout effect. And also importantly to note that the use layout effect should be used only for updates that are critical to the visual appearances of the component and that cannot wait until the next frame. For all other updates, it is generally recommended to use the use effect instead with the run asynchronously and does not block the main thread. And also it is important to remember that if you need to perform any side effects that involves the DOM, such as adding or removing the event listeners, you should do so inside the use layout effect instead of use effect. This is because the use effect runs after the browser has painted and may cause unnecessary layout thrashing if it updates the layout of your component. Okay, with that, let us move on to the example. Now, this code is a simple React functional component that uses the use layout effect and the use state. So here it uses these both hooks to measure the width of an element and display it in the screen. Okay, the first code imports that the layout effect and the use state and the use ref from the React library, right? Here the use state is a hook that allows you to add the state to a functional component. In this case, it is being used to create a state variable called width, and that will store the width of the element. Here the use state hook also returns a set width, so that can be used to update the value of the width state variable. Here now the useRef is a hook that allows you to create a reference to a DOM node. So in this case, it is being used to create a reference to a div element that will be used to measure the width of the element over here. Here, the use layout effect is a hook that allows you to synchronize and apply the layout changes to the component. So it is similar to the use effect as I mentioned earlier, but it runs synchronized after all DOM mutations. So this can be useful when you need to measure a DOM node or read its layout before making changes that affects its size or the position. So this component start with the div element with the ID myElement, and within the width state variable is displayed. And use layout effect is then invoked. So inside the hook, the code first gets a reference to the element with the ID called myElement using the document.getElementById inside the myId. This use layout effect hook is then invoked. Inside the hook, the code first gets a reference to the element using the ref variable called ref.current. You can see here this ref.current. Then it uses the getBoundingClientReact, right? This method to measure that the width of the element and assign it to the variable width. After that, the setWidth function is invoked with the width variable as an argument, so which updates the state variable with the width of the element. Here, the use layout effect hook also accepts a cleanup function, which is a function that runs when the component is unmounted or the effect is being rerun. So this is that function. Okay. So the cleanup function will also display the cleanup in console. So when you inspect in the console, then you will get to know about it, right? And also you need to keep in mind that it is important to note that the use layout effect hook should be used with the 𝐂𝐐𝐻 as I mentioned. So as it can cause the visual inconsistencies if not used correctly. So it is recommended to you to use the use effect unless you have a specific use case that requires the synchronized behavior of the use layout effect. And it is important that if you don't provide a dependency array, the effect will run on every render, so which could lead to a performance issue. So it is better to provide a dependency array with the values that the effect rely on, so that it only runs when those values changes. Okay. So it should not run whenever the small changes happens, the whole program will run. So write in this example an empty dependency array. So this is the empty dependency array. So it is passed to a use layout effect hook. So which means that it will only run the code once when the component is first rendered. So in this example, instead of using the document.getElementById to find the element, it is passed to a reference to the element as it uses the ref.current. Here, the ref.current.getBoundingClientReact. So to get the width of the element. So let us see the output over here. So we have to run. So after that. So as you can see, the width of the element is around 613.4400. Okay. So let us inspect this. Here you can see, as I mentioned, you will get a console. Here we have console, right? As you can see here, the cleaning up function, as I said in the program, right? Here you will get the cleanup function here. So inside the console, you will get the cleaning up.
Starting with what is ReactJS. So React is a JavaScript library, which means it is a collection of code on which many developers are working for the last decade. It allows us to build user interfaces for websites and also for other applications like mobile applications, desktop application, and VR applications. Basically, React is more concerned about building interfaces so that the users can interact with, getting data from the users and then display the information. So I can sum up React as an open source JavaScript library developed by Facebook used to develop interactive web and mobile user interfaces. And it is component based, where the components that utilizes the expressiveness of JavaScript with the HTML-like template syntax are used. Now, before explaining React Router, I would like to give you a brief to routing. So routing is the ability to move different parts of an application when a user enters a URL or clicks an element like link, button, icon, image, etc. within the application. Routing is basically required in transitioning from one view to another in an application. In simple words, I can say routing is a process in which a user is directed to different pages based on their action or request. Now we are good to go to understand React Router. React Router is a standard library system built on top of the React and used to create routing in the React application using React Router package. It provides the synchronous URL on the browser with data that will be displayed on the web page. It maintains the standard structure and behavior of the application and mainly used for developing single-page web applications. It enables the navigation among views of various components in a React application, allows changing the browser URL, and keeps the UI in sync with the URL. ReactJS Router is mainly used for developing single-page web applications, and it is used to define multiple routes in the application. When a user types a specific URL into the browser, and if this URL path matches any route inside the router file, the user will be redirected to that particular route. React Router plays an important role to display multiple views in a single-page application, and without React Router, it is not possible to display multiple views in React applications. Most of the social media websites like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Airbnb, etc. uses React Router for rendering multiple views. To make use of React Router, we have something called as React Router DOM. What is this React Router DOM? Which is actually the React Router data object model. It contains the DOM bindings for React routers, in other words, the router components for our websites. And if we talk about React Router Native, it contains the React Native bindings for React Router. Now moving ahead, let's see the advantages of React Router, because of which we are using React Router. So in React Router, it is not necessary to set the browser history manually, and link is used to navigate the internal links in the application. It is similar to the anchor tag, which we know is very simple as we have learned in HTML. It uses switch feature for rendering, and the router needs only a single child element, so no complexity at all. And in React Router, every component is specified in. Now talking about the installation part, so what we can do is, we can just go to our Node's official website and we can just download the Node.js, whatever the configurations of your Windows are, we can just download it. And once we have set up our Node.js on our PC, what we'll do is, we will just install Create React App. Okay, that will be very helpful while creating the application. The demo which I'm going to show you in the later part of the video, in that it will be very helpful. The command to install Create React App is npm install -g, then create -react -app. I'll just click on this, and this is how it is going to install Create React App. It will take quite some time, but I already have it installed, so I do not need it. So I'll just stop this thing over here. And after that, when we will start off with our demo part, we will execute one more command that will be npx create react app, and we'll give the application name. That we will see in later part of the video when we'll start off with the demo part while creating the application itself. So this is what you have to do. Then you will have to go to the directory where you have created the application, the folders. So with this, we have successfully installed our Create React application, which will help you to directly create an React application. We can just add the components to that. We can change the code and we can just modify it, and we'll be good to go. Now let's discuss the components of a React router. So there are 4 major components of React Router, which are frequently or always used whenever we are working with the React Router. So the first one is browser router, then we have root, then we have link, and then we have switch. So talking about browser router is a router implementation that uses the HTML5 history API, which includes push state, replace state, and the pop state event to keep our UI in sync with the URL. And it is the parent component that is used to store all of the other components. Moving to root, So root is the conditionally shown component that renders some user interface when its path matches the current URL. Talking about the link, so link component is used to create links to different routes and implement navigation around the application, and it works like HTML's anchor tag. And talking about the switch, so switch component is used to render only the first route that matches the location rather than rendering all matching routes. Although there is no defined functionality of switch tag in our application because none of the link paths are ever going to coincide, but let's say we have a route that there is no exact in here and then all the route tags are going to be processed with which start with slashes. This is where we need switch statement to process only one of the statements. So this we will see by a demo. So now I'll just open my VS Code, the editor which I am using. You can use whichever editor you want to use. And then we'll see how to include these components of React Router on the basis of the part of URL that the router will use to track the content that the user is trying to view. React Router provides 3 different kinds of routers. Now we'll see the types of React routers. So they are namely memory router, browser router, and hash router. Talking about the memory router keeps the URL changes in memory, not in the user browsers. Keeps the history of the URL in memory and does not read or write to the address bar, so the user cannot use the browser's back button as well as the forward button. It doesn't change the URL in our browser. It is very useful for testing and non-browser environments like React Native. Talking about browser router, it uses HTML5 history API, which includes push state, replace state, and pop state APIs to keep our UI in sync with the URL, and routes as normal URL in the browser and assumes that the server is handling all the request URL and points to root index.html. It accepts force refresh props to support legacy browsers, which doesn't support HTML5 push state APIs. And talking about this hash router, so hash router uses client-side hash routing. It uses the hash portion of the URL, that is window.location.hash, to keep our UI in sync with the URL. And hash portion of the URL won't be handled by the server. The server will always send the index.html for every request and ignore the hash value. It doesn't need any configuration in the server to handle routes, and it is used to support legacy browsers which usually don't support HTML push state API, and it is very useful for the legacy browsers or we don't have a server logic to handle the client side, and this route isn't recommended to be used by the React Router DOM team. And the syntax for these kinds of router we will see just in the import statements. We just have to change it and we will alias it as router. Let me just show you. Now what we'll do is we will set up our React application. So we'll create a React application using create React app. And for that, let me just go to my command prompt. There, let me just go to the desktop. So I'll change the directory over here. I'll move to desktop. And then I'll run this command. npx create -react -app. And let me call this app as Edureka routing. Now this command will create. So now here you can see is we cannot create a project name Edureka_routing because of the NPM naming restrictions. Name can no longer contain capital letters. So I'll just give it as Edureka routing. Now here you can see creating a new React app in this folder. Okay, inside the desktop we'll be getting a folder for React application that will be known as Edureka routing, and it will take some time. It will actually take some time, like around 2-3 minutes. And once this will be done, then what we'll do, we'll move to this application folder that is Edureka routing, and then we will install our React Router DOM, which I had explained you. It contains the DOM bindings for React application. We'll make use of npm and we'll install React Router DOM, and then we'll start adding the components. I'm using the Visual Studio Code as editor. You can make use of any other editors as well. Now, as you can see, the dependencies have been installed. And you can see over here as well, like some 29 packages have been added. So with this create React app, we can simply create our React application and we can just add the codes, we can add the components, and we'll have our React application created. with this, we have successfully created our React application, and the name of our React application we have given as Edureka routing. Okay, as we are going to learn routing with this. So with this, you can see over here, happy hacking, and now we are good to go. Now what I will do is, first we will move to the project directory or the application directory which we have created right now. We'll give cd and Edureka_routing. And now what we'll do is we will install the React Router DOM for this application. So we'll give npm install React Router DOM. Okay, router DOM. And we will give a space and hyphen save. This command we have to give. All right. This will install our React Router DOM for our existing application, which we have just now created with the help of Create React App. It will also take some time, but less than the previous one. And yes, with this, we have successfully installed our React Router DOM for our Edureka routing application. Now what we'll do is, now we will start creating or adding the components to the application. Now what we'll do is, I'll just close this up, and in my VS Code, I'll open the folder which has my application. So in this, in desktop, you can see Edureka routing is there. I will just open this one. Now here you can see our application, or the main folder is Edureka_routing. Then here we have node modules. All these libraries and the dependencies are here. Like you can see Babel and all for ES6 and all. We have Jest for testing. So all these are available. They have been automatically added with the help of Create React App. And then here in this public, we can see here is the index.html. So if we want to change the title or the HTML part of our application, we can just make changes over here, or we can just create the new one. We can just create a whole new code as well. So I'm not going to all these HTML and CSS part majorly, because we are here to learn about routing. First, what we'll do is we'll go to our src folder, and here you can see we have app.js file. So this component, this is actually where we will be using routers. React routers, we are going to make use of them over here in this application, so that we'll provide the links and the switch and everything, which will be linking to the other components. So what we'll do is, first of all, let me just remove whole code, because this is a default one. This Create React App is for the default one. It is like React's default application, which has been created. Now we have to create the components, add them with the help of routers and all. Now first, what we'll do is we'll import our router. So what we'll do is we'll write import. So as we have learned about the routers, so we'll give browser router. As we have seen, this is the first component of React Router. So we'll give browser router, and we'll alias as router. Then we have the other component, that is root. Then we have link, and then we have switch. And this we have to get from React Router DOM. Now here, be clear with the thing that here this browser router is aliased as router. Now to use React Router, what we'll do is we'll create some components in this React application. So what we'll do is, inside this src folder, what we'll do is we will create one more folder, and that we will make it as component. So we have one more folder inside the src, that is component. Now here in this, we'll create other files, other JS files, which are actually the components. So let me just add one file as home.js. Then we will create one more about.js. And then we have contact.js. So these three components I have added. Now let's add some code to this, so that will be available on the screen whenever we will be executing our application. So let me just go to home, and let's add some code. Like, the first thing is we have to import React from React. And then we will write the function or the reducer, we know, function home, which return heading. We'll write like welcome to Edureka. And that's it. And then we'll close this function and we'll write this export default app. Default. We'll just save it. And then next is our about component. So in this, we'll simply, let me just copy it from here. We'll just paste it and we'll make the changes over here. Here is about. Now let me write something about Edureka. So Edureka is an e-learning platform. And let me give you some more thing like know more about Edureka here. Now here I'll make use of the anchor tag and I'll give the link www.edureka.com. Now here we have the link. And I want to display this as well. So what I'll do is I'll just type it over here as well. And with this, we have closed our anchor tag. Now, when we have created this one and the anchor tag is closed over here, now one more thing is we have to return something. So here in return, I'll put all this inside a div. So this one is also ready. And here I'll have to give this about the function which we have just now created. Let's save it. And now moving to our contact component. So again, let me just copy this thing and we'll put it here. Now here what I'll write is like for queries contact here. Now no link, I don't want to give any link over here. Now let me just put the number. Let me just put this over here. And one more thing, see, and if I want to put it in the next line and all, so I can just give the br tag as we know in HTML. And no need to give it like this. Let me give one more. Yeah. Now in this about, what we'll give is, we'll give the, in place of about, we'll give contact. Let me just remove this anchor tag. Now let's make a little change over here. Let me just put it inside the address so that it will be like a single element over here. And let's just remove this heading tag. All right. And we'll just give it as. So we have created 3 components and we have added them, the home component, then the about component, then we have our contact component. Now in this app.js, what we'll do is we will make use of our React router and then we will link these components. Now what we will do is we will start adding the components to our app.js, the components of React router over here. Now as we have already added this browser router as router, now let me just create class app extends component and then we'll give it as render. We'll make use of render function. Then we'll return router and inside a div we'll provide the class name. Let's give it as app and then we have closing tag for router. Now moving ahead, what we have to do is inside the div we have to put the links as well. Link is also one of the component of React router. Before moving ahead, we can just see, let me explain you the components which we have created, especially talking about the props associated with the root component. We'll see over here, as you can see, the exact, right? This is used to match the exact value with the URL. For example, here we have given exact and then the path that to home component. And this will only render the component if it exactly matches the path. If we remove exact from the syntax, then UI will still be rendered even if the structure is like slash and home like that. And then we have something called as path over here. So this specifies a path name we assign to our component. The path name which we have assigned like contact, home, about, like that. And then we have something called as component. It refers to the component which will render on matching the path. These components which we already have, contact, home, about, all these. And as we have seen in this, we have switch as well. This switch will be used to render a single component, wrap all the roots inside the switch component. So we have just wrapped it around. And this link we have used to create the links to our components. It uses the to prop to describe the location where the link should navigate to. So here you can see this to prop. This to prop has been used by this link component. Now let's see the output of this application or this code which we have written. Now we will see the UI of our application. It's taking a little time, so it will get executed. Browser will be launched here. So you can see over here on localhost 3000, it will be launched. Here it comes. Now this is the page. Okay. Now whenever I'll click on home, now we have moved to our home page. This is happening with the help of our router, the components which we have used. The link component, we had made use of browser router and the switch. Now when I click on About Us here, you can see the URL is also changing. And with this, if I'll click on this link, so this is the normal HTML link part. With the help of anchor tag, I have just redirected to our Edureka homepage. Let's just go back, and then on Contact Us, you can find it over here. So whatever we wanted to display in our application, that's been displayed in the different pages. And we are redirecting to these pages with the help of React Router. And here is the URL. And the application name is like React App. We can make change in that also. Let me just go to this one. And in the index.html, we can just change the name of the title. Like we can change the title. Let me just give it. So here I've just made it as Edureka. Let me just save it. And then it will automatically be reloaded. Here you can see now the name of the application is here, Edureka over here. So this is the output which we are getting. So this is how finally we have successfully implemented the navigation in our React application using the React Router. Now, as earlier we have talked about the types of React Router. So let me just show you here. So as you can see in this app.js, we had made use of browser router. So we have hash router and memory router. What we have to do is just in place of this browser router, we can just simply put memory router and everything else will be same, and we can just alias it as router. Similarly, for hash router, we just have to make change in hash. In place of memory, I have kept it as hash. Now it became hash router. And the functionalities which are supported by hash router, memory router, and the browser router will automatically be implemented. So no need to change anything else. We just have to import that type of router and we will alias it as router itself. And we have already discussed what are the functionalities and how these routers are implemented according to their types. Now let's start with the real-time projects which we are going to discuss in this session. So as you can see on the screen as well, we are going to discuss this Pick It Up, an e-commerce app, Chat It Chit That, a chat app, Favbook, a social media app, Show It Off, a video sharing app, Short It Out, a URL shortener, and Groove On, a music streaming app. So let's just start with this. Starting with Pick It Up, an e-commerce application. I think most of us are very much familiar to e-commerce apps. As we know, an e-commerce app allows users to add or remove items from a shopping cart, view the cart, and check out using different payment methods. So for inspiration, you can check out some simpler storefronts like a Shopify storefront, as well as massive retailers like Amazon or Walmart. Now you might have questioned that how to build this. So to build this, you can start with creating the app with Create React App and add the Stripe NPM package, plus use shopping cart to easily handle payments directly with Stripe checkout. Build a Node API to handle creating sessions with Stripe, and then you can deploy it the backend to Heroku, frontend to Netlify, or you can deploy both on Heroku as well. Now moving on to the chat app, that is Chit It and Chat That. So whether it's a mobile application like WhatsApp or Viber, or a productivity tool like Slack or Discord, all of these use some kind of real-time chat app. It could also be part of a chat widget within a website where customers can directly talk with the site owners. Now, as we know, all chat apps allow users to send messages to others in real time, react to messages, show when they are online or offline. For example, you can check out Slack, Messenger, Discord, Crisp Chat, etc. Now, answering the question of how to build this app, so we can start with creating the project with Create React App, then use a service like Firebase or GraphQL subscriptions to create and get real-time messages. Then we can add reactions to message with emoji using the NPM package EmojiMart. Then we can deploy it to the web using Firebase tools. Now moving on to Favbook, a social media app. The app you're likely most familiar with is a social media application. In many ways, it's similar to a chat app, but expanded to a larger community of users. These users can interact with each other in different ways. So a social media app allows users in such a way that they can follow one another to receive their posts, add media like images and videos to share with others, and interact with posts such as liking or commenting on them. For inspiration, you can check out some real-time examples like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. Now answering the question of how to build this, so we can start creating the front end with create React app and creating the back end using a Node API. Then we can use a database like PostgreSQL or MongoDB along with an ORM like Prisma of PostgreSQL or Mongoose of MongoDB. Then we can use social authentication with Google, Facebook, or Twitter using Auth0, React, or Passport.js. Then finally, we can deploy the backend to Heroku and frontend to Netlify. Now let's move on to Show It Off, a video sharing app. A video sharing app is probably the most broad category as video is used across so many different apps and in many different ways. You have video sharing apps like YouTube, which allows you to search any browser and look for any video that you could imagine that users have created. Also, Snapchat gives us the ability to watch videos from other users that are recorded in a much shorter and more accessible format, and they are more oriented around interactions such as likes and views. Now let's see how to build it. So we can create the app with create React app, and then we can create the backend with Node or Express. Then we can use Cloudinary for image and video uploads to the Cloudinary API. Then we can use a database like Postgres or MongoDB along with an ORM like Prisma of Postgres or Mongoose of MongoDB. Then finally, we can deploy the backend to Heroku and frontend to Netlify, or we can deploy both on Heroku as well. Now let's move on to Short It Out, a URL shortener. A URL shortener is basically a simple tool that takes a long URL or the link and turns it into a short URL. As we know, or you might also not know, that URL shortener with support for custom domains allows users to shorten the URLs, manage the links, and view the click rate statistics. For inspiration, you can check out some real-world examples like cut, bit.ly, etc. Now let's see the steps to build this application. So create the app with create React app, then create the backend with Node or Express, and you can use a database like PostgreSQL or MongoDB. And then we can deploy this to the web using Firebase tools. Now let's see Groovon, a music streaming app. Just as React applications are perfect for serving video content, they are also great for streaming media like music. Music apps have a similar structure to video sharing apps and may or may not allow users to upload their own music. But they do allow users to listen to music, like songs, comment on songs, or even purchase the music. Even music streaming app can combine elements of a video sharing app as well as an e-commerce application. For inspiration, you can check out the regular music apps to which many of us switch to almost daily, like Spotify, SoundCloud, Pandora, etc. Now, let me give you an idea how to build it. So create the app with create React app, then create the backend with Node or Express, then use Cloudinary for image and video uploads to the Cloudinary API. Then we can use the databases like PostgreSQL or MongoDB, and then we can deploy it to the web using Firebase tools. Now we have discussed about some interesting and full-fledged projects of ReactJS. Now let's see some small projects which could be a very good source of enhancing the practical knowledge of ReactJS for beginners. There are many example projects created by the React community. Now we will see some of the projects that use React without third-party state management libraries. So starting with the calculator, it is implementation of the iOS calculator built in React. In this, you just have to create an UI which can perform mathematical calculations. Talking about emoji search, React app for searching emoji. So everyone in daily life uses some or the other chatting app where we can't do without appropriate emojis or the emoticons. So you can just create that emoji search feature using React.js. Talking about snapshot, a photo gallery with search. We can search a particular picture with the associated keywords or tags, and that's we need to do in a snapshot using React. Talking about the image compressor, an offline image compressor built with React and browser image compression. Many a times We need to compress out images to upload somewhere or for storage. And every time going for online tools, not a good idea, right? So just create an offline tool with the help of ReactJS. So these were some small projects which can be created using ReactJS. So starting with answering who is a ReactJS developer. ReactJS developers design and implement user interface components for JavaScript-based web and mobile applications using the React open source library ecosystem. These skilled front-end developers are involved in all stages of interface component design, from conception to final testing. From conception to testing, a top-notch React developer can help build interactive components for websites or web applications using the React development concepts. Today, more and more enterprises benefit from ReactJS, a testament to its burgeoning popularity in software development. Some of the high-traffic websites that use React are Instagram, Uber, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, etc. Along with the upswing in React usage is the surge in demand for a ReactJS developer. A highly skilled React developer is involved in the entire stages in the development and maintenance of user interface components. A React developer is responsible for designing and implementing UI components for JavaScript-based web applications and mobile applications with the use of open source library infrastructure. These developers are a part of the entire process, starting from conception to the major testing process, and follow popular ReactJS workflows like Flux and Redux. ReactJS developers are front-end developers who build modern-day UI components to improvise applications' performance. They leverage their knowledge about JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and work closely with testers, designers, web designers, and project managers to create a robust and effective application. So I can sum up as ReactJS developers are also known as front-end developers who design and implement user interface components for JavaScript-based web and mobile applications using the React open source library ecosystem. Now moving ahead, I'm going to discuss the job opportunities for a ReactJS developer. There are thousands of jobs in the world which demand ReactJS skills. Talking about the numbers, there are more than 43,000 jobs available on LinkedIn alone in India for React. As compared to 2019, there has been 184% of increase in the openings for ReactJS developers in the year 2020. According to India Today, a Quest report states after COVID-19, that is in 2021, ReactJS developer is one of the top digital skill jobs in demand. This quite a huge number of job opportunities makes React one of the skills most of the application developers want to learn and secure a good job. Moving ahead, let me discuss the salary trends of a ReactJS developer. Of course, salary is important. Today, React has the best pay scale on most of the job suggesting websites like LinkedIn, Glassdoor, PayScale, etc. ReactJS developers' salary depends on multiple factors like years of experience, different roles held over time, level of expertise, special skills, training and certifications, and also the geographic locations. The average salary for a ReactJS developer in India is 719,148. While talking about USA, the average salary for a ReactJS developer in USA is $92,340. Now, as I've told, the average salary for a ReactJS developer in India is 719,148, which includes the average salary of 597K for front-end developer or engineer, the average salary of 654K for software engineer, and the average salary of 1 million for senior software engineer. Now, moving ahead, let me show you the job description, which have been posted on different job suggesting portals by top organizations. So first, for example, we have Tech Mahindra. The designation is React developer and the locations are Bengaluru, Hyderabad, and Chennai. In their job description, they have mentioned the skills required for the candidate. It includes BTech is a must, MTech, or MCA with relevant experience. So they are talking about the graduation and the degree which is required, talking about the React skills. So as you can see, they need a React developer with front-end technology with Redux or D3.js experience. They need a candidate which has strong proficiency in JavaScript, including DOM manipulation and the JavaScript object model. The candidate should have thorough understanding of ReactJS and its core principles, and experience with popular ReactJS workflows like Flux or Redux. The candidate should be familiar with newer specifications of ECMA script, which are known as like ES6, ES7, ES10, etc., and RESTful APIs. The candidate should be familiar with modern front-end build pipelines and tools, and should have the experience with common front-end development tools such as Babel, Webpack, NPM, etc. The candidate should have the ability to understand business requirements and translate them into technical requirements, and familiarity with code versioning tools such as Git, SVN, Mercurial, and similar. And the candidate should have a knack for benchmarking and optimization. If your skill set is matching to this job description, you are good to go. Now let's see one more job description from Accenture, where their designation is ReactJS Application Developer and the location is Bengaluru. They require BE or preferably certified as Technical Architect Associate. They need a full stack developer who has worked with React, Spring Boot or Java, microservices. The candidate should have an experience of 1 year on most of ReactJS, Bootstrap, Nginx, Docker, Webpack, Jest, or JavaScript. And for backend, the candidate should have minimum 1 year of experience on Node.js, Python, AWS Lambda, Docker, Jest, Unit Test, or PyTest. And the candidate should be a developer with 1 to 2 years of experience and a passion for quality, good design, and clean code. So if you are matching this criteria, you are good to go for this job. So as you have seen some of the job descriptions from different companies, now I think you have an idea how to prepare for the jobs for ReactJS developer. Now moving ahead, I'm going to discuss the skills required to become a ReactJS developer, as we have seen in the job descriptions as well. So I'm going to explain those skills now. Starting with basic programming and development skills, which include HTML, CSS, JavaScript, ReactJS, Git, HTTP protocol, and terminal. Talking about HTML and CSS, no front-end developer is a stranger to HTML and CSS. The ability to work with and craft user interfaces is necessary to every organization. At a high level, React developers should be able to work with and write semantic HTML tags, work with and write CSS selectors, implement a CSS reset, understand the box model and how to reset to border box, understand flexbox, and work with and implement responsive web principles, including the proper use of media queries. Talking about the JavaScript fundamentals, including ES6, you can't rock React without a firm understanding of the fundamental concepts that the JavaScript language provides. But these ES6 skills are also essential, which include variables and scoping, arrays and objects, array methods, functions and arrow functions. In React, every single component you build is a function in one way or another. Remember that classes are just constructor functions under the hood. Regardless of the syntax you are using, when building functional components or class components, you are using some form of a function. And then comes the React. This is the main deal. You've got to learn React and learn it well to become a React developer. While learning React, you should focus on the topics like routing, JSX, etc. Talking about JSX, in React, you never really touch HTML proper. You work with a syntax extension that is truly one of the most remarkable part of the React ecosystem, that is JSX. JSX looks so much like HTML, you may think of it as HTML flavored JavaScript. What's cool about JSX is that if you know HTML and CSS, you intuitively know how to work with JSX. JSX is an abstraction on top of the React.createElement API. One reason it is vital to the library and why the React team chose to go with it in the first place is that the API would be too cumbersome to use in terms of scaling. One potentially could use React.createElement to build out an entire application. However, this wouldn't be any more efficient than just using HTML proper. It may feel at first that we have taken a step backward by adding our markup into our template logic. However, a few quick minutes with JSX and you will be hooked on the style. And now we have new JSX transform as well, so you can explore that as well. In React, you should learn DOM manipulation and event handlers, the this keyword, higher order functions and callback functions, prototypal inheritance and object creation, and the class keyword. It doesn't matter whether you are a front-end developer or a back-end developer or even a full-stack software engineer. You must absolutely know Git in 2021. Try creating a few repositories on GitHub, share your code with other people, and learn how to download code from GitHub on your favorite IDE. Git is essential to every developer's toolkit for storing projects on solutions like GitHub, Bitbucket, and GitLab. And the skills that should just be part of your day-to-day include tracking changes with add, commit, push, and pull, branching and merging strategies, and handling merge conflicts. You should know HTTPS protocols. Like if you want to become a web developer, then it's an absolute must to know HTTP and know it well. I'm not asking you to read the specification, but you should at least be familiar with common HTTP request methods like get, post, put, patch, delete, options, and how HTTP and HTTPS works in general. And you should learn the terminal as well. Though it's not mandatory for a front-end developer to learn Linux or terminal, I strongly suggest you to get familiar with the terminal, configure your shell, which includes bash, zsh, csh, etc. While I'm talking about the skills, so you should also be familiar with the build and state management tools, which include Node. Node may be a surprise to many. Like, why would you need to know how to work with Node in order to be a client-side React developer? So the answer is high server load. Using Node with React makes sense when your web application needs handling of multiple requests and maintaining server load balance. And React developers need to have a solid understanding of the NPM registry. This is the place where software developers can go to get software to help them build software. Sounds funny, but truly that's all the NPM is, a cloud storage for packages we call dependencies. And as you can see on the screen, I have mentioned NPM or Yarn. So Yarn is a package manager that is built to utilize the NPM registry. Yarn actually optimizes your NPM workflows. Yarn and NPM somewhat compete today, but the mission of Yarn has been to solve a lot of problems that are accepted in the Node NPM ecosystem. NPM has been doing everything it can to follow the patterns and practices that Yarn presents. And then comes Create React App. So it is like a quick start to create a React application. You can just install Create React App and you can just start with the default application. You can add the components in that, you can make the changes, and you can get your React application ready. Then comes the Webpack and Redux. So React has built-in state management, and many developers have been burned along the way by discovering the asynchronicity of the state updates and how React handles them. For that reason, and for scalability, Redux was born. Redux is a state management library and more. It's not a framework, but an opinionated way of working with data. The principles behind Redux are along the lines of functional programming and immutability. But it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Mastering the concepts of fundamental React programming prior to diving into Redux is key. Then comes Redux Tongue, which is a middleware, and comes the Flux. So Flux is also a workflow like Redux. So you can choose whether to use Redux or Flux, depending on the requirement. Now, talking about other utilities like API clients, server-side rendering tools, and testing libraries. So in today's world, you will rarely build an isolated GUI, that is graphical user interface. Instead, there is more chance that you will build something which communicates with other applications using APIs like REST and GraphQL. Thankfully, there are many API clients available for React developers, which include REST API actually. In that we have Fetch, Super Agent, etc. Then we have GraphQL, which includes Apollo, Relay, URQL, etc. Then talking about server-side rendering tools, you might be thinking, what is the difference between server-side rendering and client-side rendering? Let's clear that before talking about the library which supports server-side rendering with React. Well, in client-side rendering, your browser downloads a minimal HTML page. It then renders the JavaScript and fills the content into it. While in the case of server-side rendering, React components are rendered on the server and output HTML content is delivered to the client or browser. For server-side rendering, you can learn next.js or after.js or roles. But I suggest learning just next.js should be enough. And testing is one of the important skill for React developers, which is often overlooked. But if you want to stay ahead from your competition, then you should focus on learning libraries which will help you in testing. For unit testing, you can go for Jest, Enzyme, Synon, Mocha, AVA, Tape, etc. And for end-to-end testing, you can go for Selenium, WebDriver, Cucumber.js, etc. And for integration testing, you can go for Karma. You can learn the library you want, but Jest and Enzyme are recommended. And I want to add up one more thing for virtual reality. If you are interested in building virtual reality based application, then also you have some framework like React 360, which allows you to exciting 360 and VR experiences using React. So if you're interested in that area, you can further explore React 360. Now comes the soft skills. So to become a ReactJS developer or any software developer, be it front-end or back-end, some of the soft skills are always required by the companies, which include competence to translate business needs into technical requirements, time management, project management, communication and interpersonal skills, capability to write crisp and clear code, problem solving and troubleshooting skills, creativity and accountability, open-minded team player willing to accept feedback and offer suggestions, etc. And you should be having willingness to learn modern day tools and processes, as everything updates very quickly in today's world. And then as you can see on the screen, I've mentioned UI and UX. So as a front-end developer, you must be familiar with the UI and the UX part of the application. Now I'm moving ahead with the roadmap to become a ReactJS developer. So to become a ReactJS developer, you should follow a roadmap in which you should be familiar with the programming. And in programming, the skills which I've already mentioned, you should learn those. And then comes the ReactJS, which is the basic or the main thing which you should be familiar with. Then you should be completing some of the projects and you should be familiar with tools and utilities which are supporting ReactJS. And you must have graduation degree, and accordingly, you can go for the certifications as well, which are mentioned in the job description in the particular company for which you are going to apply. And also, if you are not a fresher, you should have the relevant experience as well. And to become a ReactJS developer, you should set some of the timeline or some deadline within which you will complete all the learning, you will attain the required skill set to become a ReactJS developer. The skills which I have mentioned, you can go for that. So you can attain strong proficiency in JavaScript, object model, DOM manipulation and event handlers, data structures, algorithms, JSX and Babel. Then you can go for understanding ReactJS and its main fundamentals like JSX, virtual DOM, component lifecycle, etc. You should be preceding experience with ReactJS workflows like Flux, Redux, Create React App, data structure libraries, etc. You should understand the RESTful APIs or GraphQL, HTML, CSS, ES6, code versioning tools like Git, SVN, etc. Then popular front-end development tools, CI/CD tools, DevOps, performance testing frameworks like Mocha, Jest. Then you can go for Node plus NPM. And you should have preferred degree in computer science, information technology or similar. And to help you out to attain all these skills in a proper manner, I have some suggestions, like you can go for Edureka's ReactJS certification training course. So in this training course, you will be trained to build efficient React applications by mastering the concepts of React, Redux and React Native as well. In this React course, you will learn how to build simple components and integrate them into more complex design components. And after completing this React online training, you will be able to build the applications using React concepts such as JSX, Redux, asynchronous programming using Redux, Saga middleware, fetch data using GraphQL, perform testing using Jest, successively deploy applications using Nginx and Docker, plus build mobile applications using React Native. And also you can go for React documentation whenever you have any doubt or whenever you are stuck in somewhere. And you can go for GitHub. There, so many projects are available which you can clone or take help to build your own. And if you have any doubts for which you need some answers, you can go for GitHub as well. Now, moving ahead, let me discuss the roles and responsibilities of a React.js developer. A skilled React developer makes it painless to create high-quality web applications with elegant UIs using the React library. React.js developers bridge the gap between the visual aspect and the server-side component. They take a proactive role in streamlining the look and functionality of the applications. As an efficient React.js developer, he or she is supposed to perform certain defined roles and follow responsibilities to get the best of results. Here are the major ones that any React.js developer is supposed to follow. Leverage the inbuilt React toolkit, create data visualization tools, libraries, and reusable code for prospects, integrate designs and wireframes within the application code, monitor interaction of users and convert them into insightful information, write application interface code with JavaScript, enhance application performance with constant monitoring, translate wireframes and design into good quality code, optimize components to work seamlessly across different browsers and devices, good understanding of CSS libraries, Git, Sigma, Adobe XD, etc., proper user information authentication, and develop responsive web-based UI. And if I talk about non-technical roles and responsibilities, so it includes constant interaction with other developer teams and design team to discuss UI ideas, a thorough review of applications needs and interfacing elements, and follow proper documentation for changes in application and further updates. Now, let me discuss why is React.js in demand. React.js, being a multi-layered library, has been a key delight for developers and organizations alike. React.js developers have been instrumental in assisting business owners to focus on their core business areas without having to bother about other IT-related activities. This has helped big time in enhancing client satisfaction. Some of the features of React.js which have increased the demand of React.js are flexibility, reusability, strong documentation and community support, fast rendering, single-page loading, and easy debugging. So when I talk about flexibility, it is especially visible when it comes to the use of React for web development. When we talk about React's flexibility, we refer to the library's innate modularity. As we know, React's architecture allows bundling front-end code into custom components, thus providing a solid foundation for the overall development process optimization. React.js allows you to write clean modular code, breaking the project into separate components. As a result, when code is modular, it gets easy to maintain and scale. React is super flexible in the sense that it can be integrated with other third-party libraries and MVC frameworks. You can choose to create a React project from scratch or gradually introduce React to your existing code base. And when I say reusability, React doesn't require big lines of codes to program an application. In React, we say that everything is a component. A user writes small codes called components and combines them to form another component. Simply, any app made with React is a tree of component. So React follows write once and use it anywhere principle. Then comes strong documentation and community support. Being an open source library, React has what it takes to keep attracting more and more newcomers to its community, which makes it only stronger over time. As of today, React is one of the 5 top-rated repositories on GitHub with over 170,000 stars and over 5 million applications publicly admitting to using it. React has a rich ecosystem to benefit from or contribute to. Besides, finding one's way around all this information won't be a big challenge, as the React documentation can be easily found on the official website. The community is active, so you can get rapid feedback or response to your inquiry once you feel stuck. Currently on Stack Overflow, there are over 14 million questions tagged ReactJS that have at least one accepted answer. So once you encounter a problem, chances are someone has already had the same problem and there is a solution to it, so that you will only have to copy paste it from the corresponding discussion thread. Talking about the fast rendering, so React is a client-side JavaScript library that uses server-side rendering. React's virtual DOM is basically the prime cause of faster rendering and the better performance of React apps. And this React's virtual DOM serves as a layer between how things are supposed to look and the actual processes happening to render all of those things onto the page. And the single page loading. So due to the single page loading with the help of virtual DOM, this fast rendering is achieved. And then we can talk about the easy debugging. In React, props and state are the breadcrumbs. Like when something goes wrong, it is important that we have breadcrumbs to trace the mistake to its source in the code base. And if you see something wrong on the screen, you can open React Dev Tools and find the component responsible for rendering, and then see if the props and states are correct. If they are, you know that the problem is in the component's render function or some function that is called by render function. The problem is isolated. If the state is wrong, you know that the problem is caused by one of the set state calls in this file. This too is relatively simple to locate and fix because usually there are only a few set state calls in a single file. And React results in not only easy debuggable code but also highly testable applications with the help of Jest or Enzyme, etc. Now let me discuss the future of ReactJS developers. ReactJS developers surely have a promising future, since ReactJS is showing no chances of turning back. As you must have seen the requirement for ReactJS developers on different job suggesting portals, and on LinkedIn itself we have 43,000 and more jobs for ReactJS developers. We have 170k stars on GitHub, so many requests for the applications, and more than 90,000 live websites are using ReactJS. And a lot of organizations have started migrating to React, so they definitely need more and more ReactJS developers. Now, as compared to other peer competitors, ReactJS developers are being paid heavily and are in demand. Facebook and the entire community have been trying hard to keep enhancing the effectiveness and speed of ReactJS. Hence, it is imperative that ReactJS will keep fighting the competition hard and come out as a winner. Newer updates and ways of rendering are expected soon. The way it is growing, the demand for ReactJS developers is exponentially higher. To sum up, I would say the world is unquestionably changing in rapid and dramatic ways, and the demand for ReactJS developers is going to keep increasing for sure. Now, after discussing a lot of things and addressing a lot of questions, I hope you have got the idea how to become a ReactJS developer, from where to start, how to start, what skills are required, why those skills are required, etc. All these questions have been addressed. Starting with the demand of ReactJS, a lot of big organizations, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, Airbnb, LinkedIn, etc., are using React. Talking about the numbers, 74,31,098 and more live websites are using React. 31.3% of the world's specialists are utilizing React. And you can check on GitHub, there are 170k stars for React right now. Now, let's have a look at the job opportunities. So, there are more than 43,000 jobs available on LinkedIn alone in India for React. As compared to 2019, there has been 184% of increase in the openings for ReactJS developers in the year 2020. According to India Today, a Quest report states After COVID-19, ReactJS developer is one of the top digital skill jobs in demand. Talking about the salary trends, the current average salary for the roles of React domain is 735K, which includes the average salary of 597K for front-end developer or engineer, the average salary of 654K for software engineer, and the average salary of 1 million for senior software engineer. With all this information, let's move to interview questions and answers. I will discuss the questions on 4 topics of React, which are being frequently asked in React interviews. The topics covered today are ReactJS basics or the general React, then ReactJS components, then we have ReactJS Redux, and ReactJS router. Now, starting with the general React questions. So the first or the basic question on React is, what is ReactJS? To answer this question, I would say ReactJS is an open source front-end JavaScript library which is used to build user interfaces and handle view layer for web and mobile applications. It follows a component-based approach. The React package contains only the functionality necessary to define React components, and it is typically used together with a React renderer like React DOM for the web or React Native for the native environment. Now here, when I talk about component-based approach, so everything in ReactJS is a component. So what happens is these components can be reused. They can be placed wherever required. So we can just write it once and use it anywhere and anytime. Now, even though React was open sourced only in 2015, it has one of the largest communities supporting it. Moving to the second question, that is, what are the features of ReactJS? To answer this question, I would say the major 3 features of ReactJS because of which ReactJS is known are virtual DOM, server-side rendering, and unidirectional data flow or data binding. So talking about the virtual DOM, that is actually the virtual data object model. A virtual DOM is a lightweight JavaScript object which originally is just a copy of the real DOM. It is a node tree that lists the elements, their attributes, and content as objects and their properties. React's render function creates a node tree out of the React components. It then updates this tree in response to the mutations in the data model, which is caused by various actions done by the user or by the system. Talking about the server-side rendering, when I say server-side rendering, which means using a server to generate HTML from JS modules in response to a URL request. That's in contrast to client-side rendering, which uses the browser to create HTML using the DOM. Server-side rendering with JS or React works similarly to other server-side languages. Now, when I say unidirectional data flow or data binding, so in React, data flows in a single direction, that is from parent components to child components, which helps in data binding, and it makes the application and the code predictable and more debuggable. Moving ahead with the next question, which asks, list some of the major advantages of React. Talking about the advantages of React, so it increases the application's performance. It can be conveniently used on the client as well as server side. Because of JSX, code's readability increases, and React is easy to integrate with other frameworks like Meteor, Angular, etc. And using React, writing UI test cases becomes extremely easy. Now let's move ahead to the next question, which asks, what are the limitations of React? Talking about the limitations of React, React is just a library, not a full-blown framework, and its library is very large and takes time to understand. It can be a little difficult for the novice programmers to understand, and coding gets a little complex as it uses inline templating and JSX. Now the next question is, what is JSX? So JSX is basically shorthand for JavaScript XML. This is a type of file used by React which utilizes the expressiveness of JavaScript along with HTML-like template syntax. This makes the HTML file really easy to understand, and this file makes applications robust and boosts its performance. Now let's see the next question, which is, what do you understand by virtual DOM? Explain its working. So as we have discussed in a previous question also about virtual DOM, a virtual DOM is a lightweight JavaScript object which is just the copy of the real DOM. It is a node tree that lists the elements, their attributes and content as objects and their properties. React's render function creates a node tree out of the React components. It then updates this tree in response to the mutations in the data model, which is caused by various actions done by user or by the system. And this virtual DOM works in 3 simple steps, which are whenever any underlying data changes, the entire UI is re-rendered in virtual DOM representation. Then the difference between the previous DOM representation and the new one is calculated. And once the calculations are done, the real DOM will be updated only with the things that have actually changed. So here, a kind of patchwork is done, as you can see in the picture also. Moving ahead with the next question, that is differentiate between real DOM and virtual DOM. When we compare real DOM and virtual DOM, we find the differences like real DOM updates slow while virtual DOM updates faster. Real DOM can directly update HTML while virtual DOM can't directly update HTML. Real DOM creates a new DOM if element updates, while virtual DOM updates the JSX if element updates. So that's why real DOM is comparatively slower than the virtual DOM, because in real DOM, every time any element gets updated, a new DOM is created. While with React, which uses virtual DOM, whenever any element gets updated, only the JSX part gets updated. Now, the next difference is DOM manipulation is very expensive in real DOM because every time you have to create the new DOM, while DOM manipulation in React, that is virtual DOM, is very easy. And real DOM results into too much of memory wastage, while virtual DOM results in no memory wastage at all. The reason we know, because every time new DOM is created whenever any element gets updated, while with the help of virtual DOM in React, only the JSX part gets updated with the update in any element. Now moving to the next question, which asks, why can't browsers read JSX? Browsers can only read JavaScript objects, but JSX is not a regular JavaScript object. Thus, to enable a browser to read JSX, first we need to transform JSX file into a JavaScript object using JSX transformers like Babel and then pass it to the browser. Now let's move ahead with the next question. That is, what is JSX transform? As browsers don't support JSX, the compilers like Babel or TypeScript are used to transform JSX into regular JavaScript object, which is understood by the browsers, as we have seen in the previous question. Now, JSX transform automatically compiles the JSX source code without having to rely upon the typical compilers. With the new transform, JSX can be used without importing React, and according to the setup, its compiled output slightly improves the bundle size as well. Now let's see the answer for the next question, which is how React syntax changed from ES5 to ES6. So as you can see on the screen, the code snippet for ES5 and ES6. So in ES5, we use React.create class, and which we initialize in a variable. For example, here we have taken my component. But in ES6, we just make use of classes and we make use of extends keyword, and the syntax is class, the name of the component, my component, or the class, my component, extends react.component. So the major difference between ES6 and ES5 is in ES5, we make use of create class, while in ES6, we make use of react.component. Now let's move ahead with the next question. That is how errors are handled in React. So talking about the error handling in React, the most distinctive and React-specific type of error handling is what is known as error boundaries. So error boundaries are React components that catch JavaScript errors anywhere in their child component tree, log those errors, and display a fallback UI instead of the component tree that crashed. Error boundaries catch errors during rendering, in lifecycle methods, and in constructors of the whole tree below them. Now let's see the next question. That is, what are the limitations of error boundaries in React? So talking about the limitations of error boundaries do not catch errors for event handlers, asynchronous code that is set a timeout, or request animation frame callbacks, for server-side rendering, and errors thrown in the error boundary itself rather than its children. Now let's see the next question. That is, what are the features introduced in ES7? So ECMA script 2016 or ES7 introduced two new features that are array.prototype.includes function, and the second one is exponentiation operator. Talking about array.prototype.includes function, so it checks the array for the value passed as an argument It returns true if the array contains the value, otherwise it returns false. Earlier, we needed to use array.prototype.indexOf function to check if the given array contains an element or not. Talking about exponentiation operator, so ECMA script 2016 or ES7 introduced the exponentiation operator, that is double asterisk. It has the same purpose as math.power function. It returns the first argument raised to the power of the second argument. Moving to the next question, which asks, list some of the features of ES10. So this is the latest version of ECMA script. So the features introduced in ES10 include optional cache binding, object.fromEntries, array.flat function, array.flatMap function, dynamic import, global this object. Now the next question is, how is React different from Angular? So talking about the differences between React and Angular, we see on the basis of architecture, React is only the view of MVC, that is model view controller, while Angular is complete framework for MVC, that is model view and controller. Talking about the rendering, so React supports server-side rendering, while Angular supports client-side rendering. Talking about the DOM, that is data object model. So as we have seen earlier also, React uses virtual DOM, and we have seen the advantages of using virtual DOM, while Angular uses the real DOM. Talking about the data binding, React uses one-way data binding or the unidirectional data flow, while Angular has two-way data binding or the bidirectional data flow. Talking about the debugging, React supports compile time debugging, while Angular supports runtime debugging. And talking about the author or who owns React and Angular, so React is owned by Facebook, while the author of Angular is Google. With this, we have seen some of the frequently asked questions and answers based on general React. Now moving ahead, let's see the questions based on ReactJS components. So starting with the first question based on ReactJS components, what do you understand from in React everything is a component? To answer this question, I would say components are the building blocks of a React application's UI. So everything in React is a component. And these components split up the entire UI into small, independent, and reusable pieces. Then it renders each of these components independent of each other without affecting the rest of the UI. And these components can be JavaScript functions, which takes in arbitrary inputs and returns HTML representation. Now let's see the next question, which asks, what is the purpose of render function in React, or explain the purpose of render function in React? To answer this question, I would say each React component must have a render function mandatorily. It returns a single React element, which is the representation of the native DOM component. If more than one HTML element needs to be rendered, then they must be grouped together inside one enclosing tag such as form, group, div, etc. This function must be kept pure, that is, it must return the same result each time it is invoked. Moving to the next question, that is, how can you embed two components into one? So as you can see on the screen, we have one code snippet. We have embedded two components with the help of class, then the component name or the class name, then using the keyword extends, and we made the use of react.component. With this syntax, as you can see on the screen, we are embedding two components into one. So there are two components, the my component and header component. Moving to the next question that asks, what are props in React? So props is basically the shorthand for properties in React. They are read-only components which must be kept pure, that is immutable, and they are always passed down from the parent to the child components throughout the application. A child component can never send a prop back to the parent component, and this helps in maintaining the unidirectional data flow or the data binding, and are generally used to render the dynamically generated data. Moving to the next question, what is a state in React and how it is used? Talking about the states, so states are the heart of React components. States are the source of data and must be kept as simple as possible. Basically, states are the objects which determine components' rendering and behavior. They are mutable unlike the props and create dynamic and interactive components, and they are accessed via this .state function. Moving to the next question, which is differentiate between state and props. So while comparing state and props, we find the differences like in state and prop, both receive initial value from parent component. While in state, parent component cannot change value, while with the help of prop, parent component can change the value. And we can set default values inside the components, both in state as well as in props. In state, we can make changes inside the component, but with props, we cannot make the changes inside the component. And we can set initial values for child components in both state as well as in props. But changes inside the child components cannot be made in state, while in prop, we can make the changes inside child components. Now moving to the next question, which asks, how can you update state of a component? Now here you can see a code snippet. So basically the answer for this question is, we can change the state or we can update the state of a component by making the use of this .setState function. And as you can see on the code snippet as well, earlier here name was Max and ID was 101. Then again in render function, we'll make use of setState, basically this .setState function, and inside that we can change the value or we can update the state of the component. So here we are making the change in the value. As you can see over here, we are updating it to 𝐿𝐴 and ID to 222. Now moving to the next question, that is, should we update the state directly? So to answer this question, we should not update the state directly. And why we should not update the state directly? Because if we update the state directly, calling the setState function afterward may just replace the update we made. And when we directly update the state, it does not change this .state immediately. Instead, it creates a pending state transition, and accessing it after calling this method will only return the present value, and we will lose control of the state across all the components. So that's why we should not update the state directly. Moving to the next question, that is, what is arrow function and how it is used? Arrow functions are more of brief syntax for writing the function expression. They are also called fat arrow, the functions. It is symbolized with equal to and greater than symbol. Now these functions allow to bind the context of the components properly, since in ES6 auto binding is not available by default. And arrow functions are mostly useful while working with the higher order functions or HOFs. As you can see in the picture as well, without arrow function and with arrow function. Without arrow function, we were making use of this handle change bind. While with arrow function, we have just made use of this symbol that is equal to and greater than, and then we made use of this handle on change. No need for bind and all. Now moving to the next question, that is, how do you reference a DOM element? It is a pretty simple question, and answer to this question is also very simple and crisp. That is, an object this.refs, that is this.refs, which is found as an instance inside the component, can be used to access DOM elements in ReactJS. Now moving to the next question, that is, what is the use of e.persist function? Answer of this question is nothing. ePersist function does nothing because e.persist function was used in event pooling, but with React 17, event pooling has been completely removed. But this e.persist function is still available on the React event object, but now it doesn't do anything. Now moving to the next question, which asks, what do you mean by event pooling? As we have seen in the previous question, that event pooling has been removed from React 17, but we should know what is event pooling because this question has been frequently asked in interviews. So the synthetic event objects were pooled. This means that the synthetic event object would be reused and all properties would be nullified after the event handler has been called. Now, for example, you can see the code snippets available here. So earlier, when event pooling was supported in React, the first snippet, as you can see over here, this would not work because the event object gets reused. But with the help of e.persist function, this code works because it prevents React from resetting its properties. But this is the case before React 17. Now event pooling is not supported by React. Now moving to the next question, what are React hooks? So React hooks are functions that let us hook into React state and lifecycle features from a functional component. So what is this hook into? Actually, these functions let us use the React state and lifecycle features from a functional component. And React hooks cannot be used in class components. They let us write components without the class. Now moving to the next question, when and why hooks were introduced in React? React hooks were introduced in the 16.8 version of React, or React 16.8. Earlier, functional components were called stateless components, and only class components were used for state management and lifecycle methods. The need to change a functional component to a class component whenever state management or lifecycle methods were to be used led to the development of hooks. Now moving to the next question, that is, do you know any of the techniques to optimize React app performance? So there are many techniques to optimize React app performance, but some of them are using useMemo function, using React.pure component, and maintaining state collocation. So when I say using useMemo function, so it is a React hook that is used for caching CPU expensive functions. Sometimes in a React app, a CPU expensive function gets called repeatedly due to re-renders of a component, which can lead to slow rendering. Now, this useMemo function hook can be used to cache such functions. By using useMemo, the CPU expensive function gets called only when it is needed. Talking about using React.pure component, so it is a base component class that checks the state and props of a component to know whether the component should be updated. Instead of using the simple React.component, we can use React.pure component to reduce the re-renders of a component unnecessarily. And ultimately, it optimizes the application's performance. And when I say maintaining state collocation, so this is the process of moving the state as close to where we need it as possible. Sometimes in React application, we have a lot of unnecessary states inside the parent component, which makes the code less readable and harder to maintain. Not to forget, having many states inside a single component leads to unnecessary re-renders for the component, and it is better to shift states which are less valuable to the parent component to a separate component. Now moving to the next question, what is lazy loading? Lazy loading is the feature introduced in React version 16.6, which allows for some components to load later than the other components. This way we can load the components which are fast like text earlier and the components which load later like images later. It is also referred to as code splitting and data fetching. Moving to the next question, what is a fragment in React? A common pattern in React is for a component to return multiple elements. But fragments let us group a list of children without adding extra nodes to the DOM. While rendering multiple elements will require a div tag around the content, as the render method will only render a single root node inside it at a time. So in React 16.2, fragments were introduced and we use them instead of extra div tags and all. So as you can see in the code snippet available on the screen, in place of using div tag, we are just making use of react.fragment. And inside this, you can see this child A, child B, child C. These are basically the elements. Now moving to the next question, which asks, what is setState function? So setState function allows us to change state in a React class component. As we have seen in a previous question, we were making use of this .setState function, right? And the setState function enqueues change to the component state and tell React that this component and its children need to be re-rendered with the updated state. This is the primary method you should use to update the UI. And setState does not always update the component immediately. Instead, it may defer the update until later for better performance. And the syntax for this function, as we have seen in the previous question also, here setState, and in the braces we can give the updater or the callback. We can pass it as the argument. Moving to the next question, that is, what is useState function? So the useState function is a React hook that allows to have a state variables in functional components. The useState hook is a special function that takes the initial state as an argument and returns an array of 2 entries. Moving to the next question, what do you mean by context in React? So the React Context API is a way for a React app to effectively produce global variables that can be passed around. This is the alternative to prop drilling or moving props from grandparent to child to parent and so on. A new type of context can be created using React.createContext API, and this context API is added in version 16.3 of React that allows one to share state across the entire application or part of it lightly with ease. Moving to the next question, what do you mean by prop drilling? So prop drilling can be defined as a process in React application where props are passed from one part of a tree to another by going through other parts that do not need the data but only help in passing it through the tree. And it is also known as prop threading. Now I give it over to Mr. Ashok to take you through the more questions on React components, React Redux, and React Router.
What are the differences between stateful and stateless components? This table is showing the differences. So stateful components are those which stores information about component state change in memory. Stateless are they calculate the internal state of the components. Stateful components, they have authority to change their state. As the name suggests, stateless components cannot have authority. They do not have authority to change their state. If I talk about stateful component, they contains the knowledge of past, current, and possible future changes in state. Stateless components, they contains no knowledge of past, current, and possible future state changes. Stateless components notifies them about the requirement of the state change. Then they send down the props to them. In a stateless component, if I talk about, they receive the props from the stateful components and treat them as callback functions. So this table is very important. It's a very general question again asked nowadays in ReactJS interviews, that what is the difference between stateful and stateless components. Now, what are the different phases of React component lifecycle? In a very interesting one. So as we all know that there are 4 phases. So here I'm depicting the 3 phases. And the initial phase, which are mostly used, the updating phase. One is the mounting phase, another one is the unmounting phase. We can amalgamate the 2 in one. So now it becomes 3. So initial phase, updating phase, and unmounting phase. As you can see on the screen, every phase is having their own methods, which are working in a particular order or this particular priorities. So initial phase is having the function as get default props, get initial state, component will mount, render, and component did mount. If I talk about updating phase, these are the methods or functions available in the updating phase. Again, it is at render. If I talk about the unmounting phase, so unmounting phase has a function called components will unmount. So these are the various lifecycle methods, I will say. These are called the lifecycle methods in React.js, which we need to have so that whatever props or components we are using, they get mounted and unmounted accordingly. Now, explain the lifecycle methods of React components in detail. If I talk about the lifecycle methods, which we just saw in the previous slide, that what are the lifecycle methods in React. So these are the various methods which we generally use. Component will mount. It gets executed just before the rendering both on client and server side. Component did mount. It is executed after first render only on the client side. The other one is component will receive props. It is invoked as soon as the props are received from parent class before another render is called. The other method or the lifecycle method is should component update. It returns true or false value based on certain conditions. If you want your component to update, return true, else return false. By default, its value is false. Component will update. It is called just before rendering takes place. Component did update, and the other one is component will unmount. This is called after the component is unmounted from the DOM. It is used to clear up the memory spaces. So all these are the lifecycle methods which are used in React.js. Now, what is an event in React? Events are triggered reactions, or I will say actions, to specific actions like mouse over, mouse click, key press, etc. React events are similar to HTML JavaScript events. So for example, in this example or in this diagram, as you can see, this is a bulb. There is an action called switch on. If someone clicks on, the bulb is getting on. So this is kind of a event which is getting triggered, which are reactions to specific actions. How we can create events in React.js. So as you can see here, this is a render function. Class display extends React.component in a ES6 class standard of writing the code. Here I am using a render function which is returning a div, and on click is the event. That is how we can create the events in React.js. This dot show click me. What are synthetic events in React.js? Synthetic events are the cross-browser wrappers around the browser's native event system. They combines the browser behavior into one API, and they are done to ensure events have consistent properties across different browsers. So if we want to have our React.js application running on different browsers, we will use synthetic events in React.js. Now, what do you understand by refs, which are references in React.js? So refs stands for references. So they are used to return references to a particular element or component returned by render. They are basically useful when we need DOM measurements or to add methods to the components. List some of the cases when you should use refs. So first of all, they are used to manage focus, text selection, or media playback. For triggering imperative animations, just like as you can see on the screen, if you want to display this kind of animation, imperative animation, we will use refs in React.js. And if you want to integrate with third-party DOM libraries, that is also where we use refs in React.js. How do you modularize code in React? So we can modularize code by using the export and import standards, or by using export and import properties. We can write the components separately in different files. So for one file, we will use the export property, and for another file, we can use the import property. That is how you can modularize the React.js code. And as you can see on the screen, the two code snippets for, or two files, I'll say, for export and import properties. How forms are created in React? This is again a very basic interview question with respect to React.js. So HTML form elements maintain their own state in regular DOM and update themselves based on user input. However, in React.js, state is contained in the state property of the component, and it gets only updated via setState, as we all know. So JavaScript function is used for handling the form submission. What do you know about controlled and uncontrolled components? So as I mentioned earlier, components are of two types: presentational components and container components. Again, there are two other types of components which are controlled and uncontrolled. So controlled components are those which do not maintain their own state. The state is not maintained in control components. Data is controlled by parent component, not by the child components. The control components takes in current value through props and notifies changes via callbacks. If I talk about uncontrolled components, they maintain their own state. Data is controlled by DOM, and refs are used to get their current values. So if you want to use refs, we need to have uncontrolled components. Now, what are HOC? When I say HOC, these are high order components. So these are the custom components, I will say, which we developed while doing programming in React.js. So these are the custom components which wraps another component. They accept dynamically provided child components. Then they do not modify the input component. They do not copy any behavior from the input component, and I'll say that these are the pure functions. So basically, they are the custom components which are developed to add on functionality to some other components. These are called HOCs. So what can you do with HOC? HOC means high order components. You can reuse the code, logic, and bootstrap abstraction using HOCs. We can render hijacking, state abstraction, manipulations, and also we can also do state and props manipulations with HOC, high order components. Now, what are pure components? Pure components are the simplest, fastest components which we can write. These are very fast. They can replace any component that only has render. Enhances the simplicity and performance of the application. These are the pure components. As you can see here, there is a code snippet react dom.render h1 hello document.getElement by id content. So these are the two parameters which needs to be passed to the render function, and this is the simple component, I will say simplest component, or I can say the pure components which we can write in React.js, and hence the performance, and I will say it is the fastest in React.js. Now, what is the significance of keys in React.js, or what is the significance of keys in React? It is used to identify unique virtual DOM elements with their corresponding data driving the UI. So as we all know, there is a key value pair combination always in every programming language. So just like that, we have keys in React.js, which is used to identify the virtual DOM elements. And what are the virtual DOM elements with respect to their driving UI? This we can know using keys in React.js. They must be unique number or a string. They helps React to optimize rendering by recycling existing DOM elements. So instead of re-rendering with keys, React just reorders the element. So if you don't want to re-render your UI, or if you don't want to re-render your components, you can just reorder the elements using keys in React.js. And obviously with all these things, the performance of the application gets optimized and highly increased in React.js. So that was all about the second section of the React interview question. Let's move forward, and now I will talk about the interview questions related to React Redux. This is a combination of React and Redux technology. So what were the major problems with MVC framework? MVC, we all know it's a model view controller. So what is the major problem? So DOM manipulation is very expensive because MVC framework is completely based on DOM and not on virtual DOM, just like in React.js. It's slow and inefficient, and there is a lot of memory wastage in MVC framework. Because of circular dependency, complicated model was created around models and views. So these are some of the drawbacks or problems with MVC framework. Now Flux. Before Redux, there was a technology called Flux, which was introduced by Facebook. So what was Flux? Architectural pattern that enforces unidirectional data flow. So there on the screen, as you can see, there is an action, then dispatcher, store, and view. So architectural pattern that enforces unidirectional data flow, controls derived data and enables communication between multiple components. Now, as you can see, there is a central store which has authority for all the data. Any update in data must occur here only. So store is the central or the heart for all React, Redux, or Flux application. It provides stability to the application and it reduces runtime errors. What is Redux? Redux is one of the hottest library, I will say, for front-end development. It is very, very famous. You can also check how much it is famous and its popularity on GitHub sites, that it has more number of stars and more number of watches as compared to Flux. It's a predictable state container for JavaScript apps. It is mostly used for state management applications where state needs to be managed. Applications developed with Redux are easy to test, and it helps to write applications that behave consistently and can run in different environments. What are the three principles that Redux follows? First is the single source of truth, that is the store. Single source of truth, and when I say, I'm talking about here the single store. There is only one store in a Redux or a React Redux application. State is read-only in Redux. The changes are made with pure functions. You can make changes only with the pure functions in Redux libraries. What do you understand by single source of truth? When I say single source of truth, it is the store which I'm talking about in Redux application. Redux uses a store for storing all the application state at one place. Whatever the state happening or state changes happening in a React Redux application, it will be notified to store or will happen in conjunction with the store. So components state is stored in the store and they receive updates from the store itself. So whatever the components, so these are the various components. So the state of all these components will be stored in a single place, which is called store. And any update needs to happen or needs to be there, that will be received from the store itself. The single state tree makes it easier because it's a single state tree, makes it easier to keep track of the changes over time and debug or inspect the application. What are the various components of Redux? First one is the action, which is an object that describes what happened. Reducer, it is a place to determine how the state will change. But I will say the reducers are the pure functions, which is how it needs to be done. As I said, action, that what needs to be done. Reducer, how it needs to be done is given by the reducers because these are the pure functions. Store, as we saw just now in the previous slide, that store, it's a single source of truth. There needs to be a single store which is used for state management of all the components. So a state object tree of the entire application is saved in the store. View is to simply displays the data provided by the store. Show how the data flows through Redux. Again, a very interesting question, that how we should know that how data is flowing through Redux. So as you can see here, that these are the container components, which is passing data as the props. They are passing the data to actions. Action is passing the data to reducer. So the input for the store is the reducer, and reducer is again giving the data to the provider component, or you can say the view part of it. So that is how the data flows in Redux applications. How actions are defined in Redux. Always remember that action should have a type property that indicates the type of action which needs to be performed. So type is very important for every action. So let's say in this code snippet, as you can see on the screen, there is a function called add2, which is taking the input parameter as text. Is what it is returning is, it is a type, and this what type of action it is, add to do. So they must be defined as a string constant, and we can add more properties to it. That is not a problem with the action. You can add as many properties as you want, but the most mandatory part or the most important part for an action is it needs to have a type property, and actions are created using functions called action creators. The other question which we have is, what is the role of reducers? Reducers are the pure functions which specify how the application state changes in response to an action. It takes in the previous state and an action and returns the new state. So what is the work of a reducer? Basically, it takes the previous state, make the changes, and it returns the new state. It determines what sort of update needs to be done based on the type of action and returns the new values. It returns the previous state if no work needs to be done. If there are no changes in the state or if there are no updates, obviously it will return the previous state which it takes as an input, and as an output it returns a new state with the changed parameters. What is the significance of a store in Redux? Store, as we all know now, that store is the single source of truth. It's a JavaScript object. Holds the application state. It maintains the application, or I can say it maintains the state tree of the particular application. That is the store. Provides a helper methods to access the state, dispatch action, and register listeners. With store, the data state can be synchronized from the server level to the client layer without much hassle. And since it's a single store, it's a single source of truth, it's a single place to maintain the state tree of the application, it makes the development of the large application very easy and fast. How Redux is different from Flux. So these are the basic differences between Flux and Redux. If I talk about Flux, the store contains state and change logic. It has multiple stores, flat disconnected stores. In Flux, all the stores are disconnected. Singleton dispatcher, React component subscribe to the store. In Flux, state is mutable, so you can change the state in Flux. If I talk about Redux, store and change logic are separate. We have a single store in Redux. Single store with hierarchical reducers. You can have multiple reducers in Redux, but the store needs to be single in React Redux application. So if I talk about the container components, they utilize connect, and state is immutable. This is again very important, that the state is immutable in React Redux application. What are the advantages of Redux? So I've listed down some of the advantages of Redux: predictability, maintainability. The application will be very fast. It will be optimized. We have many developer tools. The testing and debugging part will be easy, and huge open source community for Redux is available out there on internet, and precise organization of code, because there is only one store which is maintaining the state, complete state of the application. So these are some of the advantages of Redux, which makes React Redux application very famous and very popular.
And the next question in React Redux is, what is ReduxThunk? So ReduxThunk is a middleware that lets call action creators that return a function instead of an action object. That function receives the store's dispatch method, which is then used to dispatch regular synchronous actions inside the body of the function once the asynchronous operations have completed. And the thunk can be used to delay the dispatch of an action or to dispatch only if a certain condition is met. And basically it sits between action creator and reducer in the React Redux flow.
Now moving to the last part or the last section of this webinar, that is the React Router interview questions. What is React Router? It's a very powerful routing library, I'll say. It helps in adding new screens and flows to the application. It keeps the URL in sync with data that is being displayed on the web page, and it is a very simple API. The React Router API is very simple to use. Why switch keyword is used in React Router version 4? The switch keyword is used when you want to display only a single route to be rendered among several defined routes. So as you can see here, if I want to have multiple defined routes, but I want to display only a single route, then I use the switch statement. Why do we need a router in React? So router helps in defining multiple routes inside the router, with each route leading to a unique view. As you can see on the screen, there are multiple React routers. For example, these are the 3 routers, and each router is leading or representing, I will say, a unique view. So that is why we need a router in React. List down the advantages of React router. So there are various advantages of React router. The API is very simple, and the API is all about component. The API is component based. The router APIs. It can be visualized as a single root component. No need to manually set history value. It has separate packages for web and native platforms. That's why it's very famous. How React router is different from conventional routing of data. So again, there is a table of the differences based on the various topics. Pages involved. Each view corresponds to a new file. In React router, only single HTML page is involved. In conventional routing, we used to have multiple pages involved in application. If I talk about the URL changes, in conventional routing, HTTP request is sent to the server and corresponding HTML page is received. In React router, only the history attribute is changed. This is a very drastic change in the request response terminologies. If I talk about the look and feel, user actually navigates across different pages for each view in conventional routing. But for React router, user is duped thinking he's navigating across different pages, but it is actually not the case.
Now the next question is, why is switch keyword used in React router v5 or version 5? Although a div tag is used to encapsulate multiple routes inside the router, the switch keyword is used when we want to display only a single route to be rendered amongst the several defined routes. The switch tag, when in use, matches the typed URL with the defined routes in sequential order. When the first match is found, it renders the specified value and thereby bypassing the remaining routes. As we have seen some of the frequently asked questions and answers in React interviews, now let's have a look on the requirements or the skills required to become a ReactJS developer. So to become a ReactJS developer, you should have the following skills, which include fundamentals of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, fundamentals of ReactJS, which includes JSX, ES6, hooks, Node plus NPM, and Redux.
And with this, we have come to an end to this video on ReactJS tutorial for beginners. If you enjoyed listening to this video, please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment on any of your doubts and queries. We will reply to them at the earliest. And do look up for more videos and playlists, and subscribe to Edureka's YouTube channel to learn more. Thank you for watching and happy learning.